The world before the Great Freeze was a place of cautious abundance, a planet breathing in slow rhythms that had shaped generations of early humans. Grassland stretched far across continents, dotted with herds that moved like drifting shadows beneath wide skies. Rivers flowed steadily, not yet trapped beneath staring panes of ice, and forests whispered with life that hummed through the seasons. People gathered berries in warm sunlight, napped stones beside unfrozen streams, and followed the migrations of animals they had known for centuries. Life was not easy, but it was familiar, predictable in its cycles, gentle compared to the hardship that waited just beyond the horizon. Across those landscapes, small clans ventured along ancient paths, guided by instinct, memory, and the shared stories of elders whose voices echoed through the generations. Children learned the ways of the world in playful exploration, while adults hunted, prepared hides, and shaped tools with a quiet sense of continuity. Nights were filled with the glow of hearth fires and the soft murmur of conversation. Though dangers always lingered, predators, storms, sickness, there was a sense that the land still offered enough for those who knew how to listen to it. The earth was not yet the vast, frozen fortress it would soon become. But even in this relative calm, subtle changes began to ripple through the environment. Winters grew slightly longer, arriving with sharp winds that cut deeper than memory suggested. Summers hesitated, stretching thin and cool, leaving plants slower to bloom. Animals shifted their routes, grazing farther than before, forcing hunters to follow with uneasy footsteps. These changes were quiet at first, barely noticeable within a single lifetime, yet unmistakable in their direction. The planet was tipping toward an era that no human had ever witnessed, a slow descent into an unforgiving cold. Above, the sky carried signs no one could interpret. Sunlight seemed weaker, diffused through thin veils of high-altitude ice crystals. Storms gathered with unusual ferocity, sweeping across plains in sudden bursts of sleet and cutting rain. The wind developed a new voice, sharper, more insistent, as though warning of the coming transformation. For people who relied on intimate knowledge of the seasons, these strange patterns stirred a quiet sense of unease. There were whispers around the fire, shared glances of concern, and stories beginning to form about spirits shifting in the world beyond sight. It was during this time that early humans felt the first pressure of uncertainty pressing against their daily lives. Hunting became more difficult when herds moved unpredictably, gathering required more effort as plants receded. The once familiar landscapes began to feel subtly altered, as if the earth itself was retreating under an invisible, encroaching weight. People watched the skies with searching eyes, wondering what these signs meant for the future. Mothers wrapped children more tightly against the cold. Hunters sharpened their tools with extra care. Everyone sensed a change they could not name. Despite these challenges, life continued with a fragile sense of normalcy. Clans still traveled to their traditional gathering places, meeting other groups, sharing stories, exchanging tools, and celebrating the small rituals that stitched their world together. There was comfort in community, in knowing that their ancestors had survived countless hardships. Fires blazed warmly at night, sending dancing sparks into the dark, as elders told children that the earth always shifted and always returned to balance. Hope lingered, steady and unbroken, even as the first true claws of ice began to scratch across the land. Then came the first winter that refused to end. Snow piled deeper than anyone remembered, swallowing landmarks and muffling the world under thick silence. Rivers slowed, then froze, trapping fish beneath solid ice. The air grew heavy and brittle, a cold that bit through fur and hide, demanding more fuel, more movement, more resolve. People huddled closer to the fire, rationing food with careful hands, waiting for a spring that arrived late and weak. When warmth finally returned, it felt thinner, like a pale shadow of seasons past. This difficult winter marked the turning point, though no one recognized it fully at the time. The patterns of life had shifted in ways too profound to ignore. The world was changing, tightening its grip, preparing to plunge into a deep freeze that would reshape entire continents. Early humans stood at the edge of a transformation they did not understand, guided only by instinct, resilience, and the hope that they could endure whatever the earth would demand of them. In the quiet moments before the true ice age began, the planet held its breath, and humanity unknowingly prepared to be tested like never before. The shift into the deep freeze began not with a single catastrophe, but with a series of subtle changes that unfolded slowly, almost imperceptibly, across generations. The earth itself seemed to exhale a long, cold breath. Seasons stretched and warped, bending under the influence of forces far beyond human reach or understanding. The sun's warmth grew faint as Earth's orbit shifted in its natural cycles, tilting the planet toward longer winters and shorter summers. At first, these changes seemed like strange but temporary fluctuations, the kind of odd seasons elders might recall from childhood. But with each passing decade, the coolness deepened, settling into the land like an unwelcome guest refusing to leave. Clouds drifted differently across the sky, forming dense blankets that dimmed the daylight. Snow began to linger longer than it should, clinging to hillsides well into early summer. Glaciers, once distant giants sleeping in the far northern mountains, stirred and crept forward with a slow, grinding determination. In the oceans, cold currents shifted, redistributing heat in ways that disrupted life from the tiniest plankton to massive marine mammals. The world was entering a phase of planetary transformation, pushed by rhythms older than humanity itself, rhythms carved into the bones of Earth over millions of years. As global temperatures dropped, moisture in the atmosphere transformed into relentless storms. Blizzards swept across regions unaccustomed to such ferocity, leaving entire landscapes buried under layers of ice. Frozen rain fell in sheets, hardening surfaces and making even simple movement dangerous. The wind grew sharper, as though honed to a blade's edge, carrying with it a deep, hollow chill that seeped into the marrow. Trees began to crack under the pressure of ice-laden limbs, sending echoes through forests like warnings from the earth. The sky, once a comforting dome of shifting color, became a canvas of cold gray, a constant reminder that the world was turning its face away from warmth. For early humans, these changes brought confusion and mounting anxiety. They observed the transformation with the same keen attention they used to track herds or predict weather, yet the patterns eluded them. Hunters who had relied on generations of knowledge began to find their understanding of the land faltering. Rivers that flowed steadily for centuries froze solid. Grassy meadows, once lush feeding grounds for mammoth, bison, and wild horses, turned brittle and colorless. The great herds wandered in restless confusion, seeking pastures that no longer existed. Their migrations became unpredictable, forcing human bands to follow in increasingly perilous conditions. Food scarcity crept into daily life. Hunting trips grew longer and more dangerous as prey thinned out or moved into unforgiving terrain. Gathering became unreliable when plants struggled to grow in the shortened, cooler summers. Clans stored what they could, but surpluses that once lasted seasons dwindled in mere weeks. Hunger became a familiar shadow, not yet devastating but persistent enough to unsettle even the most resilient. People whispered fears around the fire, wondering if the spirits of the world were shifting, if something had angered the unseen forces that governed the land. The physical world was not the only thing changing, so were the sounds within it. Forests grew quieter as birds migrated earlier or failed to return. The buzzing of insects faded. Footsteps on frozen ground echoed differently, carrying a hollow note. Even the air seemed thinner, crisper, as if holding less warmth with each passing year. People learned to read these signs, even if they could not interpret them fully. They instinctively sensed they were living through a moment of profound transition. As glaciers advanced from the north, they carved new scars across the continents. Entire valleys were swallowed beneath towering walls of ice. Mountain passes, once used as travel routes, were smothered under frozen masses that moved with glacial strength, slow yet unstoppable. These immense structures of crushing weight ground rocks into powder, leaving behind vast plains of gravel and silt. The earth groaned under the strain, and as ice sheets expanded, they pressed down on the land, altering coastlines and reshaping ecosystems. Rivers shifted their courses, carving new paths around the advancing ice. Human groups faced difficult decisions as familiar territories became unrecognizable. Some chose to migrate southward in hopes of outrunning the cold. Others attempted to adapt in place, building sturdier shelters and learning to endure harsher conditions. But no matter how they responded, the freeze continued its steady march. There was no part of the world untouched by its influence. Even regions that did not freeze completely felt the changes through shifting rainfall patterns, dropping temperatures, and the disappearance of animals they depended on. The psychological impact of these environmental upheavals was immense. For people whose worldview was deeply tied to natural cycles, the breaking of those cycles shook the foundations of meaning itself. Rituals were performed more often, with greater urgency. Stories grew darker, filled with cautionary tales about the spirits of winter or the ancient beings that controlled the seasons. Fear mingled with determination as humans attempted to make sense of forces far beyond their comprehension. Yet within this struggle, a new resilience began to form, a willingness to adapt, experiment, and innovate. As the freeze tightened its grip, early humans discovered new ways to track weather, read the stars, and anticipate changes in the land. They sharpened their understanding of the natural world because survival demanded it. They watched animals more closely, learning from how they moved, how they sheltered, how they endured. In these observations, humans found clues about how to navigate the coming extremities. Their growing awareness marked the first steps toward mastery over a world rapidly turning hostile. And still, the cold deepened. The sky dimmed further as reflective ice sheets spread across vast regions, bouncing sunlight back into space and causing temperatures to plummet even more. This feedback loop accelerated the cooling, locking the planet into the grip of the Ice Age. The deep freeze had fully arrived, turning once livable lands into icy frontiers. For early humans, the age of relative comfort had ended. Ahead lay an era defined by endurance, ingenuity, and the relentless struggle to survive a world engulfed in cold. The world's growing chill pushed early humans toward an unavoidable crossroads, a moment when every clan, every family, had to confront a question more ancient than language itself: stay, move, or vanish. The land that had once supported them with familiar rhythms was changing faster than the stories of their ancestors could explain. Game grew scarce, plants struggled to grow, and icy winds carved through even the thickest layers of fur and hide. In this uncertainty, no path felt safe. To stay meant risking starvation or freezing, to move meant venturing into lands unknown, where dangers might be even greater. Each choice carried weight that pressed against the human spirit. For those who considered staying, the decision was rooted in loyalty to home. Generations had lived upon these lands, hunted these valleys, crossed these rivers, and buried their dead in sacred soil. Leaving felt like abandoning not just a place, but an identity. Some elders argued that the spirits of the land had always provided and would continue to do so if the people showed proper respect. Rituals were performed with increasing fervor, offerings made to unseen forces in hopes of restoring balance. But practicality tugged at the edges of faith. The cold did not relent for prayers, and familiar hunting grounds began to look like silent wastelands. Those who chose to stay attempted to adapt in ways their ancestors had never needed to imagine. They built stronger shelters, reinforced with mammoth bones, thicker hides, and layered insulation of dried grass and clay. Fires were kept burning longer, guarded like living entities that needed constant feeding. Hunters traveled farther each day, often returning with little or nothing. Food stores were rationed carefully, divided by trembling hands that knew each portion might mean the difference between survival and despair. The decision to remain tied people to the land in both hope and desperation, asking them to endure hardships that tested every limit of their resilience. Meanwhile, other groups saw movement as their only hope. To them, the land was no longer a guardian but a collapsing world. They watched herds migrate north or south in confused patterns and understood that following them might be the only way to keep hunger at bay. Migration required immense courage. Entire clans uprooted themselves, carrying infants, tools, furs, and memories into landscapes no one had mapped. Every journey was a gamble. They might discover new hunting grounds or wander into regions devoid of shelter and prey. Yet despite the risks, movement gave them a sense of agency, a belief that survival lay somewhere beyond the horizon. Traveling was a grueling test of endurance. Sharply colder winds swept across exposed plains, numbing limbs and threatening frostbite with every misstep. Footing became treacherous on frozen ground, and sudden storms could bury an entire camp within hours. Children and elders were the most vulnerable, their bodies struggling to generate enough heat. At night, fires flickered uneasily as if startled by the vastness of the world around them. Still, the migrating clans pushed forward. They followed animal tracks, studied the flow of rivers, and used the stars to guide their paths, trusting that movement itself was a kind of survival strategy written into the instincts of all living things. Within these decisions, stay or move, lay deep divisions that fractured communities. Families argued in hushed voices, some wished to cling to home, others felt drawn to the promise of new lands. Bonds that had held clans together through generations were stretched thin. Some groups split entirely, leaving behind mournful farewells as loved ones chose different fates. The emotional toll was immense. Every departure carried fear, guilt, and uncertainty, but also the faint spark of hope that somewhere, conditions might be kinder. Human beings learned, painfully and intimately, that survival was not only a physical struggle but also a test of unity and emotional endurance. A third possibility waited in the shadows, though no one spoke of it openly, that some groups might simply vanish. The cold was indifferent, swallowing smaller or more isolated communities with brutal efficiency. Clans that failed to adapt or refused to move found themselves trapped by storms, weakened by hunger, or outmatched by predators drawn to their desperation. Their stories faded into the quiet of the frozen world. The knowledge they carried, songs, tool-making secrets, spiritual beliefs, disappeared with them. Their absence weighed heavily on those who survived, a reminder that the price of miscalculation in this new era was annihilation. Yet even as uncertainty tore at them, early humans displayed remarkable ingenuity. Some combined strategies, moving short distances, then settling temporarily to experiment with new hunting methods or shelter designs. Others formed alliances with neighboring groups, sharing resources and knowledge in ways that expanded their chances. Cooperation became a powerful tool. Where one clan struggled alone, multiple clans could thrive together, pooling skills and diversifying survival approaches. This era forged new relationships, new communication networks, and new forms of leadership defined not by dominance but by adaptability. In the end, the migration dilemma became a defining chapter in human evolution. Each decision shaped not only immediate survival but also the future paths of entire lineages. Whether they stayed and adapted, migrated into unknown territories, or perished in the relentless freeze, every choice etched itself into the story of humanity. The cold pushed people into a state of constant reconsideration, forcing them to reimagine what it meant to belong to a place, a group, or even to the world itself. And when the next phase of the deep freeze arrived, only those who had learned to balance courage with caution, movement with memory, and instinct with innovation would endure the coldest age ever known. The first steps into the glacial frontiers began with a kind of fearful wonder, a mixture of dread and awe that settled into the hearts of those brave enough to cross the invisible boundary between the world they knew and the one reshaped by ice. Before them stretched a landscape unrecognizable even to the oldest elders, a place where the earth's breath seemed to freeze midair and the horizon shimmered with a pale, ghostly glow. The ground crackled beneath their feet, each step sinking into snow that seemed endlessly deep, swallowing sound until it felt as if the world had fallen silent. These early travelers understood instinctively that they were walking into a realm that cared nothing for human life, a domain sculpted by cold, wind, and time. Yet something pushed them forward, hunger, necessity, curiosity, or perhaps the quiet belief that survival lay somewhere within this white abyss. The air felt different here, sharper and heavier, carrying the crisp scent of frozen water and distant storms. Every inhalation stung their lungs, while exhaled breath drifted upward in slow, ghost-like clouds. Even the light seemed changed. Sunrises cast long blue shadows across the ice, and sunsets painted the frozen world in hues of pink and violet that felt almost unreal. These colors, though beautiful, carried an eerie quality, reminding travelers that this place did not belong to them. But amid that alien spread of ice, they also glimpsed strange forms, glaciers rising like colossal walls, ancient and indifferent, their surfaces etched with veins of deep sapphire and gray. The sheer scale of these icy giants humbled everyone who approached them. Travel through this terrain demanded constant vigilance. Beneath the deceptive smoothness of snow lay hidden dangers, crevasses that yawned open underfoot, fragile ice sheets that groaned ominously, or sudden pits where the earth dropped away without warning. Sometimes the group would halt without speaking, listening to the distant thunder of ice shifting, cracking, or collapsing somewhere beyond sight. These sounds echoed across the frozen expanse, rolling like the growls of a sleeping beast. Every noise served as a reminder that the landscape itself was alive, moving, reshaping, and capable of swallowing them without hesitation. Yet there were moments of strange beauty that softened the harshness. At night, the sky unfurled in a brilliant display of stars, unclouded and so bright they seemed to vibrate. The auroras rippled like celestial rivers, shimmering in shifting greens and reds that danced silently across the heavens. These lights became more than a spectacle, they became symbols of hope, guiding weary travelers as they huddled together around meager fires that struggled to survive the wind. In the glow of those flickering flames, faces illuminated by shifting colors, people found comfort in knowing they were not entirely lost, even in a world transformed beyond comprehension. Movement was slow. Each person carried bundles of fur, stone tools, and dried food strapped securely across their backs. Children were wrapped tightly and held close, their bodies nestled against warm chests to prevent the cold from stealing their breath. The youngest cried when the wind howled, their small voices quickly swallowed by the vast emptiness. Adults pressed forward with a quiet determination, taking turns breaking trails through deep snow, their legs aching with relentless exertion. Every step became an act of will, a reminder that survival demanded unyielding persistence. Despite the immense cold, signs of life still existed at the edges of the glacial frontier. Tracks of hardy animals appeared occasionally, Arctic foxes, snow hares, or massive herds of reindeer migrating to sparse feeding grounds. These glimpses offered reassurance that humans were not completely alone in this frozen world. Hunters studied the prints carefully, learning new patterns of movement, new habits shaped by the advancing ice. Each piece of knowledge became precious, a tool as vital as any spear or blade. Observing how animals survived offered clues to their own survival, where to find shelter, how to conserve energy, when to move, and when to remain still. Shelter became one of the greatest challenges. The usual materials, wood, branches, layered grasses, were scarce or entirely absent in the icy expanses. Travelers learned to use snow itself as an ally, carving windbreaks and temporary shelters into drifts, shaping domes of packed ice that trapped heat surprisingly well. When possible, they sought rocky outcrops or caves revealed by glacial retreat, grateful for even the smallest protection from the relentless wind. Inside these makeshift refuges, they shared warmth, whispered encouragement, and rested briefly before continuing. As they ventured deeper, a quiet transformation occurred within them. The frozen world, though terrifying, awakened new instincts and new forms of resilience. They became more observant, more patient, more attuned to subtle changes in wind, snow texture, and temperature. What began as fear slowly shifted into a cautious respect. They did not conquer the icy frontier, no human could, but they learned to endure it. By crossing into the glacial frontiers, these early humans stepped into the unknown with trembling resolve. Their journey was more than migration, it was an initiation into the harsh realities of the deep freeze era. Each step carried them farther from the familiar and deeper into a world reshaped by ice, testing their bodies, their minds, and their collective will. And though the frozen landscape offered no welcome, it forged within them a strength that would carry their descendants through the coldest age in human history. Fire became more than a tool, it became a lifeline, a companion, and a symbol of human defiance against a world that seemed determined to extinguish life. In the frozen expanses of the Ice Age, where snow pressed down like a weight on the land and winds carved through bone and hide, fire was the thin line between survival and death. The ability to create, maintain, and control it transformed human existence. It was not enough to simply light a flame, fire had to be tended, protected, and understood as part of a delicate ecosystem within the harshness of ice. Every spark held immense significance, a promise that warmth, light, and sustenance could be wrested from a world dominated by cold. Early humans learned quickly that fire was both fragile and powerful. A single gust could snuff it out, leaving them vulnerable to freezing nights. They carried embers carefully wrapped in animal hides, moving them between camps so that the spark of life could survive long journeys. These glowing fragments became more than practical tools, they were objects of reverence, treated with caution and respect. Children watched, wide-eyed, as elders coaxed flames from flint and tinder, and through these lessons, knowledge was passed down in ways that were both technical and spiritual. Fire became a teacher, illustrating cause and effect, patience, and the delicate balance between human action and natural forces. Fire reshaped human activity in the cold. Nights were no longer simply dark and threatening, they became spaces for community, for reflection, for the passing of stories that bound the group together. Around flames, humans shared knowledge about hunting strategies, animal behavior, and shelter construction. They debated which areas of the frozen landscape held promise and which were traps waiting to claim the unwary. Fires illuminated carvings on stone and bone, transforming these objects into symbols of memory and meaning. In this glow, culture itself began to flourish, carried on heat and light into a world that offered so little comfort otherwise. But fire's importance went beyond warmth and light. It became a tool for manipulating the environment. With controlled flames, humans could drive animals during hunts, smoke out predators from dens, or soften frozen hides for clothing and shelter. Cooking transformed food, making it more digestible, more calorically efficient, and safer to eat. The simple act of roasting meat over embers meant energy conserved for survival, energy that might otherwise be spent shivering in the relentless cold. Every fire was an experiment in understanding energy, chemistry, and timing, a daily negotiation with forces larger than themselves. Fire also carried profound emotional weight. In the vast white silence of glaciers and frozen plains, the crackle of flames was a heartbeat, a reminder of life persisting against impossibility. The sight of sparks dancing upward into the night sky brought relief, hope, and even awe. Humans began to assign meaning to the fire itself, seeing in its flicker the reflection of ancestors, spirits, or the future yet to come. Rituals emerged around hearths, offerings made to sustain flames that seemed almost sacred. In a world stripped of color and softness, fire became a center of imagination, a focus for human creativity and resilience. The technical mastery of fire advanced rapidly in response to environmental pressures. Early humans discovered new kinds of tinder and fuel, from dry moss hidden beneath snow to resinous wood resistant to moisture. Techniques for maintaining long-lasting fires were refined, including the layering of logs and the strategic placement of stones to conserve heat. Fire pits became more permanent in some sites, signaling a new approach to settlement and mobility. These innovations were subtle, often imperceptible in isolation, yet together they represented a revolution in human capability, a clear demonstration that intellect could shape survival as much as strength. Fire also created social bonds. Maintaining a hearth required cooperation, one person alone could not always keep flames alive through stormy nights or long treks. People worked in shifts, feeding embers and building protective walls of stone or ice. This daily collaboration fostered trust, communication, and a sense of shared purpose. Without fire, the harsh landscape would have been a solitary place of suffering. With it, humans could form communities that not only survived but thrived, sharing both resources and the warmth of presence. In essence, fire became a mirror of humanity's ingenuity and spirit. It represented the ability to carve order from chaos, warmth from cold, life from near death. Through its mastery, early humans began to assert some measure of control over their environment, creating spaces where survival was possible and hope could persist. Fire was a teacher, a guardian, a companion, and a muse. In the frozen wilderness of the deep freeze era, it illuminated the path forward, revealing not only the physical means to endure but also the enduring power of human courage, curiosity, and connection. Survival in the unforgiving cold demanded more than fire. It required ingenuity that extended to every layer of human existence, from the ground they walked on to the skins that wrapped their bodies. Clothing became a lifeline, a barrier between fragile flesh and the relentless bite of wind and frost. Early humans learned to fashion garments not merely for modesty but for protection, using layers of animal hides, furs, and skins meticulously prepared to insulate against sub-zero temperatures. Every stitch, every seam represented knowledge honed over generations, a marriage of observation, experimentation, and the intimate understanding of materials. The ability to transform raw animal hides into functional clothing was a mark of survival, a skill as vital as fire itself. Needles carved from bone or ivory became indispensable tools, tiny instruments through which humans shaped warmth. Threads were drawn from sinews, tendons, or plant fibers, strong enough to hold layers together yet flexible enough to allow movement. The process required patience and dexterity. Errors could leave gaps through which frost would bite, and in a world where every degree mattered, precision could be the difference between life and death. Children watched and learned. Guided by elders who emphasized not only technique but also the philosophy embedded in creation, that skill, care, and foresight were as important as speed or strength. Clothing evolved beyond the practical. Layering systems emerged, combining thin inner garments with thick outer hides, allowing humans to regulate temperature while moving through diverse conditions. Hoods, mittens, and leggings were added, not as decoration, but as essential protection against wind chill. The design of these early garments reflected keen observation of animals, mimicking the insulation provided by fur and feathers. In doing so, humans drew inspiration directly from the natural world, blending biology with ingenuity. These adaptations were not uniform across regions. Each community refined techniques suited to the particular climate they faced, creating a tapestry of cultural innovation. Tools complemented clothing in the struggle for survival. Spears, knives, and scrapers were no longer simply hunting implements, they were instruments in a broader strategy of adaptation. Sharpened flint edges allowed precise cutting of hides, shaping garments that fit snugly and retained warmth. Bone tools were hollowed, carved, and bent to function as fasteners or structural supports for clothing. Each innovation reflected an intimate dialogue with the material world, a constant negotiation between necessity and creativity. Humans learned not only to survive but to manipulate their environment in increasingly sophisticated ways, crafting a culture that fused practicality with artistry. The art of staying alive extended beyond the body to shelter. Huts constructed from mammoth bones, covered with layered hides and reinforced with brush or stone, provided sanctuaries against the storm. Snow and ice were sometimes used to block wind or create insulating walls, revealing a capacity to transform even the harshest materials into havens. These shelters were not static, they were adapted seasonally, expanded or relocated according to the needs of the group. Like clothing, they reflected a deep understanding of local resources, an ability to read the environment and respond to its shifting challenges with intelligence and patience. Survival gear became a communal endeavor. Gathering materials, preparing hides, and maintaining tools required cooperation. Adults, adolescents, and children all had roles, teaching early humans the value of shared labor. In the process, knowledge was transferred, rituals and techniques became embedded in culture, and social bonds were strengthened. The act of crafting, whether a garment, a tool, or a shelter, was also an act of connection, tying individuals to each other and to the landscape they inhabited. Survival was not merely a matter of endurance but of interdependence, an understanding that the group's well-being depended on the careful coordination of skills and effort. The harsh climate also encouraged experimentation. Humans observed which materials retained warmth, which stitches prevented drafts, which structures held heat longest. They refined techniques over years, decades, and centuries, creating increasingly efficient adaptations. Innovation was not abstract, it was a daily response to immediate threats, a form of problem-solving with direct consequences. Mistakes were costly, teaching lessons more effectively than any spoken instruction. Over time, these small innovations accumulated, forming a legacy of resilience that would be passed down through generations. Ultimately, the combination of clothing, tools, and shelter defined the human capacity to endure the Ice Age. It was not brute strength that ensured survival, but ingenuity, observation, and careful planning. Each innovation represented a conscious effort to impose order on a chaotic environment, to create warmth, security, and hope where nature offered little. In mastering these practical arts, humans learned to shape their own destinies, to stretch the boundaries of survival, and to lay the groundwork for a culture that valued creativity as much as necessity. In the endless cold, these skills were the true armor, enabling life to persist against the harshest challenges the planet had ever presented. Hunting during the Ice Age became a complex choreography between humans, the environment, and the animals that shared it. No longer could early humans rely on simple strategies. The deepening cold had transformed both prey and landscape, demanding intelligence, patience, and coordination on a scale never before required. Herds moved unpredictably across frozen plains, seeking scarce vegetation and water. Stealth alone was insufficient when the wind carried scents further, when snow muffled footsteps but obscured visual cues, and when predators, both human and animal, competed for the same dwindling resources. Each hunt became a lesson in adaptability, a negotiation with forces far larger and older than themselves. The animals they pursued were remarkable in their own right. Woolly mammoths, their shaggy hides thick enough to resist frostbite, moved in ponderous but deliberate patterns, guided by instinct honed over millennia. Reindeer, bison, and horses navigated the icy terrain with agility that humans could not match. Predators such as saber-toothed cats or cave lions watched from shadows, as skilled at survival as the humans themselves. Understanding the habits of these creatures required careful observation over years, a deep memory of migration routes, feeding grounds, and seasonal behaviors. Knowledge of animal psychology and movement became as crucial as the sharpness of a spear or the accuracy of a thrown stone. Hunting was rarely an individual effort. Teams coordinated movements to drive herds toward ambush points or traps, using fire, noise, and terrain to their advantage. Strategies were passed down orally, rehearsed silently, and executed with precise timing. A single misstep could result in injury or lost opportunity. Hunters had to read the snow, recognize the subtle signs of movement, and anticipate the reactions of prey. In this way, hunting became a form of dialogue with the environment, a conversation conducted with caution, respect, and cunning. Every hunt carried lessons in foresight and patience, sharpening the mental acuity as much as physical prowess. Tools were essential, their design a reflection of necessity and ingenuity. Spears with sharpened flint tips could pierce thick hides, while throwing sticks or atlatls allowed distance and leverage that human strength alone could not provide. Knives and scrapers processed meat, prepared hides, and extracted marrow from bones, ensuring no part of the animal was wasted. Each tool was a product of careful observation, experimentation, and adaptation to the cold. Ice, snow, and frozen ground presented unique challenges, shaping the evolution of weapons and techniques in ways that were subtle yet critical to survival. The ability to innovate under pressure became a defining characteristic of human life in the deep freeze era. Preparation and timing were as vital as skill. Hunting in freezing temperatures required understanding the rhythms of both prey and environment. Hunters had to consider wind direction, snow conditions, and the likelihood of ambush by other predators. Exhaustion could mean death, so physical conditioning and resource management were paramount. Meals were planned with precision, portions rationed, and energy conserved for the days-long treks that often preceded a successful kill. The hunt was not simply an act of taking life, it was a careful balance of energy, risk, and reward, a strategy for maintaining existence against the relentless pressures of cold. The social dimension of hunting was equally important. Successful hunts ensured the survival of the group and reinforced cooperation and trust. Younger members learned by watching, imitating, and gradually participating, absorbing techniques and strategies that could only be taught through experience. Elders shared stories and instructions, sometimes embedding moral lessons about caution, respect, and the relationship between humans and the animals they depended upon. Hunting became a ritualized practice that strengthened bonds and reinforced cultural continuity, tying survival to both skill and social cohesion. Failure, however, was a constant companion. Prey could escape, storms could interrupt plans, or the cold could sap strength before a successful kill. Yet even failure taught lessons, offering insights into animal behavior, environmental hazards, and human limitations. The iterative nature of hunting, trial, observation, and adaptation, was a crucible for intelligence, creativity, and resilience. It fostered the ability to anticipate change, to innovate under pressure, and to respect forces beyond human control. Each hunting season contributed to the accumulation of knowledge that would be vital for generations to come. Hunting in the Ice Age was therefore more than survival, it was an education, a cultural practice, and a statement of human ingenuity. It combined observation, strategy, physical skill, and social cohesion in a single, continuous effort to wrest life from an indifferent world. Through these hunts, early humans honed not only their bodies but their minds and communities, learning to negotiate a world of scarcity, danger, and beauty. In the frozen landscapes of the deep freeze era, the hunt became a defining narrative of human adaptation, resilience, and the persistent drive to endure. Water became both a precious resource and a silent threat during the Ice Age, a paradox of life that demanded ingenuity, foresight, and caution. Rivers that had once flowed freely slowed under sheets of ice, their surfaces glinting deceptively in the pale sunlight. Springs froze, leaving only trickles of water hidden beneath layers of snow and frost. Streams became treacherous, their hidden currents carving channels beneath the ice that could collapse underfoot. Humans had to learn to read these signals, to understand the difference between frozen stability and hidden danger. Access to water was no longer taken for granted, it required careful planning and constant vigilance. Ice itself became a source of sustenance. People learned to chip through layers of hardened snow to reach the liquid veins trapped beneath, collecting water in hides or carved stone containers. Snow could be melted over fire, providing hydration when rivers were inaccessible. Each method carried risks. Ingesting snow directly could lower body temperature dangerously, and melting ice required precious fuel, forcing a careful balance between warmth and survival. The management of water became an intricate practice, blending observation, timing, and careful calculation, transforming something previously abundant into a resource of critical importance. The location of water shaped movement, settlement, and strategy. Camps were often established near flowing rivers or unfrozen pools, even if these sites were exposed to wind or predators. Seasonal shifts forced humans to track water sources carefully, understanding that what was safe one month could become inaccessible the next. Following the subtle rhythms of the landscape became essential, a task requiring memory, patience, and knowledge accumulated across generations. Water became a guide, dictating paths of migration, influencing hunting patterns, and determining the placement of shelters. The presence of water also brought opportunities. Animals, dependent on the same sources, became predictable when humans understood their behavior. Tracks near rivers revealed movement patterns, giving hunters an advantage. Fishing, though limited in icy conditions, provided vital nutrition when land-based prey was scarce. Even small puddles could harbor life, edible plants, insects, or crustaceans, that supplemented diets when large game was unavailable. Water became both a sustainer and a teacher, revealing the interconnectedness of all living things in a landscape dominated by cold and scarcity. Yet water could be deadly. Thin ice hid hidden dangers, and streams could collapse under weight, sweeping travelers into icy currents. Flooding from melting snow or sudden storms threatened camps and disrupted carefully stored supplies. Humans learned to approach water with caution, testing ice with poles, observing currents, and sharing knowledge about hazardous areas. These practices were passed down orally, becoming rituals of safety and collective memory, ensuring that even in the harshest conditions, knowledge of risk was embedded in the community. Water shaped technology as well. Early humans developed containers, from hollowed-out wood to sewn hides, designed to transport and store liquid safely. Boiling water over fire, when possible, ensured its safety and provided warmth. Tools were adapted to gather and manage water efficiently, illustrating a growing understanding of cause, effect, and the importance of resource management. Every interaction with water became an exercise in observation, adaptation, and experimentation, reflecting the deep intelligence required to endure a world transformed by ice. The spiritual and cultural significance of water also deepened. In a frozen landscape, it became a symbol of life, continuity, and transformation. Springs and streams were revered, and rituals often acknowledged the essential role of water in sustaining life. Stories may have emerged about spirits dwelling in rivers or wells, guardians of the liquid that allowed humans and animals alike to persist. In this way, water was not merely practical, it was woven into the moral and philosophical understanding of existence, a force to be respected and honored. Ultimately, water defined the rhythm of life in the Ice Age. Its scarcity demanded foresight, its abundance offered hope, and its danger instilled respect. Managing it required ingenuity, collaboration, and constant attention, reinforcing lessons in patience, observation, and adaptation. Those who mastered the nuances of frozen rivers, snow, and ice gained a critical advantage, understanding that survival was not merely a matter of strength but of insight, strategy, and intimate engagement with the natural world. In this way, water became more than a necessity, it became a teacher, a challenge, and a guide through the relentless cold of the deep freeze era. The landscapes of the Ice Age were not uniform expanses of white, but a complex mosaic of frozen plains, jagged mountains, and icy rivers, each presenting its own challenges and opportunities for survival. Early humans learned to read the land as carefully as they read animal tracks or the night sky. Every slope, every valley, and every ridge told a story, a record of wind patterns, snowfall, predator activity, and the hidden currents of rivers beneath ice. Understanding the topography became essential, not just for movement, but for planning hunts, building shelters, and finding resources that could sustain life through long winters. Mountains were both barriers and sanctuaries. They blocked travel and funneled winds, creating zones of extreme cold and snow accumulation, yet they also offered vantage points from which to observe migrating herds or approaching storms. Rocky outcrops and caves provided shelter, protection from wind, and storage for food and tools. Humans learned to identify patterns in snowfall and avalanche risk, timing their movements to avoid hidden dangers. The mountains demanded respect and strategy, teaching lessons in caution, patience, and long-term planning. Frozen plains offered different challenges. These expanses seemed deceptively open, promising ease of travel, but they could be treacherous underfoot. Snowdrifts concealed hidden depressions, frozen rivers could collapse beneath weight, and blizzards could appear without warning, erasing visibility and disorienting even the most experienced travelers. Survival on the plains demanded endurance, teamwork, and constant vigilance. Humans developed methods to navigate, using natural landmarks, the angle of the sun, and the stars at night. Observation became a form of literacy, a skill that connected people to the rhythm of the land and allowed them to anticipate danger before it arrived. Rivers and waterways, partially frozen or flowing beneath ice, were lifelines and obstacles alike. They supplied water, attracted animals, and sometimes provided routes that were faster than traversing the snow-covered plains. Yet these rivers were unpredictable. Ice could conceal sudden holes or swift currents. Seasonal thawing could turn a familiar stream into a torrent capable of sweeping away everything in its path. Humans learned to test ice thickness, observe changes in flow, and interpret subtle signs such as temperature, wind direction, and animal behavior to navigate safely. Mastery of these waterways meant the difference between life and death, turning the landscape into a kind of classroom for practical survival education. Vegetation, though limited, shaped movement and settlement. Grasses, shrubs, and hardy plants appeared in predictable patterns, offering food for herbivores and clues for hunters. Early humans tracked these patterns, understanding that where prey grazed, humans could also find sustenance. Even in the depths of winter, frozen plants provided emergency nutrition and materials for shelter, bedding, and fuel. Observation of these cycles required patience and memory, as the timing of growth, flowering, and dormancy could vary with subtle shifts in temperature or snowfall. Reading the land became a practice of careful attention, an ongoing dialogue with the rhythms of nature. The land itself also held dangers beyond climate. Crevasses, unstable ice sheets, and sudden drops demanded caution and strategic thinking. Predators, both human and animal, used the terrain to their advantage. Early humans had to consider not just what they needed to survive, but how the landscape could be used to outwit competitors and predators alike. Ambush points, defensive positions, and hidden pathways were studied and incorporated into daily movement and hunting strategies. This deep understanding of terrain was an extension of intelligence, blending observation with foresight, instinct with experience. Seasonal changes transformed the landscape, creating a cycle of opportunity and threat. Spring thaw brought slush and flooding, summer revealed scarce vegetation and easier travel, autumn froze the ground and shifted animal migrations, and winter imposed relentless cold and scarcity. Humans adapted by moving strategically, storing food, reinforcing shelters, and planning hunts with the land's cycles in mind. Survival was a continual negotiation with terrain, climate, and prey, requiring both flexibility and precision. Those who could read the landscape, predict its changes, and respond creatively were the ones who endured. In essence, the Ice Age landscape was both adversary and teacher. It demanded respect, observation, and adaptation, shaping the development of human intelligence, social organization, and culture. Movement, hunting, shelter building, and resource management were all inseparable from the terrain itself. Early humans learned that survival was not simply a matter of endurance, it was a mastery of the land, an ability to interpret its signals, and to act with foresight and coordination. By engaging intimately with the frozen world around them, humans transformed a harsh, indifferent environment into a living classroom that honed skills, forged bonds, and defined the possibilities of life during the deep freeze era. The nights of the Ice Age were long, dark, and suffused with a profound stillness that pressed against the mind as much as the cold pressed against the body. Darkness was no longer simply the absence of light, it was a palpable presence, an element to be navigated with care. Fires became the guardians of human life, their flickering glow warding off predators, illuminating shelters, and offering comfort against the oppressive blackness. Around these flames, humans gathered not only to survive physically, but to nurture the fragile warmth of social connection, storytelling, and memory. Nighttime became a crucible for both imagination and resilience, a space where the mind confronted solitude, fear, and reflection simultaneously. In these long nights, the senses sharpened. Hearing became acutely attuned to subtle sounds, the snap of a distant branch, the low rumble of ice shifting, or the faint hiss of wind over snow. Vision adapted to faint glimmers, stars piercing the darkness like distant fires, and the occasional reflection of moonlight on snow or ice. Smell became a tool for survival as well, detecting predators or guiding humans toward hidden streams. Each sense became a survival instrument, honed by repetition and necessity, creating a heightened awareness that linked the human mind directly to the rhythms of the frozen world. Sleep was both essential and precarious. Maintaining warmth during the bitterest nights required careful planning, multiple layers of furs, insulation from the cold ground, and proximity to fire or other bodies. Children and the elderly were especially vulnerable, and the community developed systems to ensure that no one suffered unnoticed during the night. Night watches emerged naturally, a rotation of vigilance that balanced the need for rest with the constant threat of freezing temperatures or predators. These routines fostered cooperation, trust, and an intimate understanding of collective responsibility, reinforcing the social structures vital for survival. Stories and oral traditions thrived in the dark hours. Fires became stages for memory, teaching, and reflection. Elders recounted hunts, migrations, and lessons learned from harsh winters, ensuring that knowledge was preserved and passed down. Stories were not merely entertainment, they were survival manuals encoded in narrative, blending observation, wisdom, and caution into forms that could be understood and remembered by young and old alike. Tales of spirits, ancestors, or forces within the frozen landscape likely grew from these long nights, intertwining practical knowledge with moral and philosophical reflection. In darkness, imagination flourished alongside caution. Fear was a constant companion during the night. The wind howled across the plains, sounding at times like the cry of predators or the lament of lost spirits. Shadows cast by firelight could twist into imagined threats, and the silence of snow-covered landscapes often intensified the sensation of vulnerability. Yet fear was not merely paralyzing, it was instructive. It taught humans to remain alert, to respect the environment, and to anticipate danger. By confronting fear directly, early humans developed resilience, patience, and a capacity to remain calm under pressure, skills as vital as warmth or nourishment. Nighttime also offered moments of wonder. Stars and celestial patterns became tools for navigation and markers of seasonal change. Aurora borealis rippled across northern skies, shimmering in ways that were at once terrifying and beautiful. These phenomena may have inspired reflection on the cosmos, the nature of life, and humanity's place within it. In the stillness of the night, humans were confronted simultaneously by vulnerability and awe, teaching lessons in humility, observation, and contemplation that extended far beyond immediate survival. Hunting and foraging continued during nights in subtle ways. The glow of a small fire might illuminate animal tracks, and some nocturnal creatures could be tracked or harvested when human senses were most attuned. Night offered both danger and opportunity, requiring careful judgment and courage. Planning hunts or scouting terrain during darkness demanded foresight, communication, and trust, integrating survival with social cohesion and collective intelligence. Humans learned that night was not merely a passive time of waiting, but an active period in which life could be secured through vigilance and knowledge. In essence, the long Ice Age nights shaped both body and mind. They demanded heightened perception, social cooperation, and intellectual engagement. Darkness was a teacher, instilling skills in observation, reflection, and resilience. It was also a space where imagination and culture thrived, where stories, strategies, and philosophies were born from the interplay of fear, awe, and necessity. The mastery of night became inseparable from the mastery of survival itself, teaching early humans that endurance required more than warmth or tools, it required awareness, adaptation, and an intimate understanding of the invisible rhythms of the world around them. In the stillness of the night, humans learned to see beyond survival, glimpsing the profound interplay between life, environment, and consciousness during the deep freeze era. The social bonds of early humans were tested and strengthened under the relentless pressures of the Ice Age, revealing the profound importance of cooperation, empathy, and communication in survival. In a world dominated by cold, scarcity, and ever-present danger, no individual could endure alone. The survival of a group depended on each member contributing skills, energy, and knowledge to the collective effort. From the youngest child to the oldest elder, everyone had a role, and the cohesion of the group was as vital as fire or clothing. These bonds were forged through shared hardship, mutual dependence, and the recognition that survival was a communal endeavor. Daily life demanded collaboration in myriad forms. Gathering fuel, tending fires, processing hides, and preparing food required coordinated effort. Each task carried weight, not only for the immediate survival of individuals but for the endurance of the entire group. Lessons were transmitted through demonstration and repetition, allowing younger members to internalize essential skills through observation and practice. Mistakes could be costly, but the group structure provided both support and correction, creating a system in which knowledge and experience were preserved and transmitted across generations. This structured cooperation became a hallmark of human resilience, a psychological adaptation as critical as any physical innovation. Conflict was inevitable, yet the pressures of survival demanded mechanisms to manage it. Disputes over food, shelter, or leadership had to be resolved quickly to prevent fracture of the group. Social norms, unspoken rules, and rituals likely emerged as methods of maintaining harmony. Acts of sharing, offering, and reciprocity were not merely cultural choices, they were survival strategies embedded in daily life. Those who failed to cooperate risked isolation, vulnerability, and death, reinforcing the evolutionary importance of empathy, negotiation, and social intelligence. The Ice Age, in this sense, acted as a crucible for the development of complex social structures that balanced individual needs with collective stability. Rituals and communal gatherings helped strengthen these bonds. Fires became focal points for storytelling, teaching, and celebration. Stories encoded lessons about hunting strategies, the behavior of animals, the cycles of seasons, and the dangers of the landscape. They also carried moral and philosophical messages, illustrating the consequences of actions, the virtues of patience, courage, and foresight, and the importance of respect for both nature and community. Through ritual and story, humans created a shared memory and identity, a framework that allowed groups to function cohesively even under extreme stress. Cooperation extended to the defense of the group. Predators, both human and animal, presented constant threats, and survival demanded vigilance. Watch rotations, coordinated movements, and collective response to danger became ingrained practices. Each member's awareness, skill, and courage contributed directly to the protection of the whole, reinforcing the idea that survival was inseparable from social cohesion. These practices also cultivated trust and dependence, teaching humans that individual well-being was entwined with the welfare of others. The Ice Age also fostered emotional intelligence. Empathy was not an abstract value but a practical necessity. Recognizing distress, illness, or fatigue in others allowed the group to respond appropriately, redistributing labor, offering warmth, or providing care. Emotional awareness became a survival tool, guiding decisions about cooperation, leadership, and resource allocation. Through these interactions, humans learned to navigate complex social dynamics, balancing self-interest with collective need, and creating a system in which mutual aid was rewarded and neglect punished by circumstance. Teaching and mentorship were central to maintaining these social bonds. Elders passed down accumulated knowledge of hunting techniques, fire maintenance, clothing construction, and shelter building. Younger members, in turn, observed, practiced, and internalized these lessons, ensuring continuity of skills and survival strategies. The process was both practical and symbolic, reinforcing respect for experience and creating a sense of continuity across generations. Through this dynamic, early humans cultivated not only survival skills but the capacity for abstract thought, memory, and cultural transmission. In essence, social cohesion was the invisible architecture of survival during the Ice Age. It enabled humans to face extreme cold, scarcity, and danger with coordinated strength. Cooperation, empathy, ritual, and storytelling intertwined to create resilient groups capable of enduring hardships that would overwhelm solitary individuals. The Ice Age tested the limits of human sociality, shaping a species that relied on connection, intelligence, and mutual dependence as much as on fire, clothing, or tools. Through the crucible of cold, humans discovered that the bonds between them were not simply comforting, they were the foundation of life itself, a lesson that would echo across millennia and form the basis for the complex societies that would eventually emerge long after the glaciers receded. Language during the Ice Age was far more than a tool for simple communication, it became the lifeblood of survival, a conduit for knowledge, strategy, and social cohesion. In the frozen expanses, where every decision carried the weight of life or death, the ability to convey information accurately and efficiently was essential. Words, gestures, and shared sounds allowed humans to coordinate hunts, warn of approaching predators, and teach complex techniques for clothing, shelter, and fire management. Language transformed experience into collective memory, turning individual insight into a communal asset, and ensuring that the hard-earned wisdom of one generation could endure into the next. Communication likely began as a combination of vocalizations, gestures, and facial expressions, each carrying nuanced meanings that evolved over time. A specific call could signal danger, mark the presence of prey, or instruct movement during a hunt. Subtle shifts in tone and gesture could convey urgency, caution, or reassurance. These early forms of language required acute observation, empathy, and shared understanding. Misinterpretation could be fatal, reinforcing the importance of clarity and attentiveness in both teaching and collaboration. Over generations, these signals became more structured, forming a proto-language capable of expressing complex ideas about the environment, social relationships, and strategy. Language was intimately tied to memory and storytelling. Around the warmth of fires or within the confines of shelters, humans recounted experiences, mapping survival strategies onto narratives that could be easily remembered. Stories carried practical lessons, the behavior of specific animals, the locations of water and shelter, techniques for fire making, and methods for navigating treacherous terrain. They also encoded cultural norms, moral guidance, and communal values. By embedding information within narrative, humans ensured its retention, transforming survival knowledge into culture, and culture into a shared identity that bound the group together across time and space. Hunting and foraging demanded precise communication, particularly in cooperative strategies that required coordination across distances and varying terrain. Calls, signals, and prearranged gestures allowed hunters to drive prey toward traps, organize ambushes, and adjust tactics in real time. Miscommunication could result in failed hunts or injury, emphasizing the high stakes of clear expression. Through repeated practice, groups refined their vocal and gestural systems, creating a repertoire of signals with shared meaning and immediate practical value. Language became not only a tool for survival but a medium for developing trust, teamwork, and strategic thinking. Language also nurtured reflection and imagination. Humans began to articulate not only the immediate and practical but also the abstract, the hypothetical, and the emotional. They named features of the landscape, patterns of behavior, and qualities of the animals they depended upon. They expressed fear, joy, awe, and grief, creating a space in which emotions could be shared and processed communally. This capacity for abstract thought allowed humans to plan for the future, anticipate seasonal changes, and teach skills that extended beyond immediate experience. Language became both a map and a mirror, guiding action while reflecting inner life. Teaching was inseparable from language. Elders guided younger members through instruction embedded in speech, song, or gesture, often paired with demonstration. Children learned not only the how but the why behind techniques, why certain materials were preferred for clothing, why fire needed careful tending, why specific approaches to hunting increased the chances of success. This combination of instruction and explanation reinforced understanding and memory, creating layers of knowledge that were both practical and philosophical. Language thus served as the scaffolding upon which survival and culture were constructed. Moreover, language reinforced social cohesion and hierarchy. The ability to articulate ideas, relay experiences, and mediate disputes enhanced influence within the group. Elders, skilled hunters, or those who possessed specialized knowledge often held authority, their words carrying weight and guiding collective decisions. Shared understanding through language created norms, expectations, and accountability, ensuring that individuals acted in ways that supported the group's survival. Communication became a stabilizing force, connecting individual action to collective benefit. In essence, language during the Ice Age was a lifeline, a repository of memory, a tool for coordination, and a vessel for culture. It allowed humans to extend knowledge across space and time, to strategize with intelligence, and to nurture the social bonds essential for enduring extreme conditions. Language was both practical and philosophical, rooted in survival yet expanding the mind's capacity for reflection, creativity, and empathy. In the frozen landscapes of the deep freeze era, speech and gesture were as critical as fire, clothing, and tools, illuminating paths forward, preserving lessons learned, and enabling humans to navigate a world defined by danger, scarcity, and relentless cold. The arrival of fire into the daily life of Ice Age humans marked a turning point in survival, culture, and perception of the natural world. Fire was far more than a tool, it was a transformative force that shaped social structures, hunting strategies, technological innovation, and even the imagination. Its presence illuminated the night, warded off predators, provided warmth, and allowed humans to manipulate the environment in ways previously impossible. To understand fire's significance during the deep freeze era is to understand the intersection of necessity, ingenuity, and emerging culture, a combination that allowed humans to thrive in conditions that would have overwhelmed less adaptable species. In the bitter cold of glacial periods, temperatures regularly plunged to levels that could incapacitate or kill unprotected humans. Hypothermia was a constant threat, frostbite a persistent danger. Clothing made of animal hides and furs provided some insulation, but without fire, survival would have been tenuous at best. Fire created a portable source of heat that could be used both within shelters and in temporary camps during hunting or migration. The strategic placement of fire within shelters insulated living spaces, allowed for prolonged activity after sunset, and created zones where young children and the elderly could survive the harshest temperatures. Fire thus extended the boundaries of human habitation, turning otherwise uninhabitable zones into safe spaces for life and work. The acquisition and maintenance of fire was itself a sophisticated skill. Early humans could have relied on natural sources such as lightning strikes, volcanic activity, or natural fires, but these were unpredictable. Over time, methods for producing and sustaining fire emerged, involving friction, striking stones, or using pyrite and tinder. These methods required understanding of materials, timing, and physical technique, as well as patience and persistence. Maintaining a fire demanded constant attention, fuel had to be gathered, airflow managed, and embers monitored to prevent extinguishment. The responsibility of fire management became an essential social task, often requiring rotation among capable members of the group. Mastery of fire was therefore not merely physical, it was intellectual, social, and strategic, combining foresight, technical skill, and coordination. Fire altered human diets and nutrition in profound ways. The ability to cook meat and plants made food more digestible, unlocked additional calories, and reduced the presence of harmful bacteria or parasites. Cooking allowed humans to extract nutrients from sources that would otherwise have been inedible or toxic, expanding dietary options during periods of scarcity. Fire also facilitated the processing of hides and fibers, enabling the production of more effective clothing, footwear, and shelter materials. Boiling water and rendering fats became possible, contributing to both nutrition and warmth. Through the controlled use of fire, humans not only survived, they transformed the very quality and safety of their food sources, reinforcing the importance of innovation in adaptation to extreme environments. Socially, fire became the focal point around which communities gathered, communicated, and transmitted culture. Around its warmth and light, humans shared stories, recounted hunts, instructed the young, and reinforced social norms. Fires illuminated the cave walls, making the earliest forms of art and symbolic expression visible to all members. The gathering of groups around fire nurtured cohesion, empathy, and collective memory, transforming survival into a collaborative endeavor enriched with culture and ritual. Fire became both a physical and symbolic center, a source of life, protection, and identity. In the darkness of the Ice Age night, it was a beacon of community and continuity, linking the present to accumulated knowledge of the past. Fire also reshaped hunting and foraging practices. Controlled fire could be used to drive animals into traps, clear areas of snow or underbrush, or create smoke that influenced the behavior of prey. Nighttime hunting became possible in limited contexts, as small fires or torches provided light without signaling presence to distant prey or predators. Even the presence of fire in a camp could act as a deterrent to predators, giving humans strategic advantage over dangerous animals. In this way, fire expanded the spatial and temporal scope of human activity, allowing groups to operate more effectively across landscapes previously constrained by darkness and cold. The cognitive implications of fire are equally profound. Fire required anticipation, planning, and problem-solving, engaging abstract thought in a manner that other survival activities often did not. Humans had to predict weather patterns, fuel needs, and group activity schedules. They needed to understand cause and effect relationships in maintaining combustion and protecting the fire from extinguishment. The presence of fire likely encouraged more complex social coordination and communication, reinforcing the development of language, teaching, and shared ritual. Fire thus became a nexus of technological, cognitive, and social evolution, influencing nearly every aspect of life in the Ice Age. Fire also inspired imagination and ritual. The flickering flames, dancing shadows, and warmth amidst darkness transformed perception and emotional experience. Caves illuminated by fire took on symbolic meaning, walls became canvases for artistic expression, and the interplay of light and shadow may have inspired early spiritual or religious thought. Humans began to perceive the world in ways that combined observation with abstraction, survival with reflection. Fire was not merely practical, it was a medium for philosophy, storytelling, and communal identity. The ability to control such a powerful force may have also inspired narratives about the relationship between humans and the natural world, embedding lessons about respect, caution, and ingenuity within emerging cultural frameworks. The management of fire required cooperation and social trust. Its importance was so critical that neglect or mismanagement could jeopardize the entire group. Decisions about who tended the fire, when it was fueled, and how it was shared required negotiation and coordination. Fire became a central axis around which leadership, responsibility, and social organization revolved. Its presence reinforced the importance of collective care, empathy, and strategic foresight, embedding these traits in the fabric of daily life and community identity. Fire also interacted with material culture in transformative ways. Tools could be hardened through exposure to heat, shelters reinforced, and landscapes subtly altered to human advantage. Smoke could preserve meat, drive away insects, and even influence the growth of certain plants. Fire provided a means to extend human influence over the environment, turning passive adaptation into active engagement. In this way, fire blurred the boundary between humans and nature, establishing humans as agents capable of shaping their surroundings while simultaneously learning from its rhythms and dangers. Ultimately, fire was more than a survival tool, it was a catalyst for human evolution in thought, society, and culture. It expanded physical and temporal possibilities, enhanced nutrition, strengthened social bonds, nurtured imagination, and promoted cognitive complexity. The control of fire marked a fundamental leap in human adaptation, providing a lifeline in the coldest reaches of the Ice Age while simultaneously laying the foundations for cultural and intellectual development. The flicker of flame against cave walls was not only warmth and light, it was the ignition of human ingenuity, resilience, and reflection, a profound testament to the ways in which early humans transformed a hostile, frozen world into a landscape of possibility, survival, and wonder. In the deepest freezes of the Ice Age, fire was humanity's constant companion, teacher, and protector. It shaped the rhythm of life, extended the boundaries of habitation, and allowed humans to manipulate and understand the environment in unprecedented ways. It bridged the gap between necessity and creativity, transforming survival into a complex interplay of intellect, skill, and culture. The mastery of fire stands as one of the most profound achievements of early humans, illustrating the intricate connection between technological innovation, social cohesion, and cognitive evolution during the Deep Freeze era. Through fire, humans asserted agency in a world defined by relentless cold and uncertainty, proving that even in the harshest climates, ingenuity, cooperation, and reflection could illuminate the darkness and sustain life. Fire was both a mirror and a map, reflecting human resilience and guiding the path through one of history's most challenging epochs. The Ice Age was a period of extreme environmental pressure, a time when survival depended on the most precise balance of observation, adaptation, and endurance. Among the countless challenges faced by early humans, the hunt for food was the most immediate and perilous. In a frozen world where vegetation was scarce and prey had to be carefully tracked through snow, the acquisition of nourishment became both a physical and intellectual endeavor. Survival demanded strategy, collaboration, and a deep understanding of the behaviors of animals and the landscape itself. Every hunt was a high-stakes exercise in patience, skill, and risk assessment, requiring the integration of observation, timing, and intuition honed over generations. Humans had to learn to read the land with exceptional precision. Tracks in snow, subtle signs of broken branches, disturbed earth, and the faint smell of animals allowed hunters to predict the movement and habits of their prey. This skill was a combination of innate observation and cultural knowledge passed down through storytelling and instruction. Recognizing the difference between old and fresh tracks, between patterns of migration and the erratic movement caused by predators, required careful attention and experience. The Ice Age landscape was a vast, open puzzle, and understanding it was essential not only for finding food but for avoiding danger. The prey itself presented complex challenges. Mammoths, reindeer, bison, and other large Ice Age animals were not passive targets, they were intelligent, alert, and often dangerous. Hunting a mammoth required intricate planning and coordinated effort. Groups had to consider the terrain, wind direction, and the physical condition of both the animal and themselves. Ambush points had to be chosen strategically, often near cliffs, rivers, or natural bottlenecks where movement could be predicted and controlled. Hunters used tools and weapons innovatively, from spears tipped with stone or bone to early forms of traps and driving techniques. Every element of the hunt involved calculated risk. A misjudgment could result in injury or death, while success meant sustenance and reinforcement of social bonds. Cooperation was at the heart of Ice Age hunting. Individual strength was insufficient for large game, coordinated effort amplified the capabilities of the group. Hunters had to communicate silently or with signals, moving in precise alignment to surround or drive prey toward predetermined locations. Roles were often distributed according to skill, knowledge, and experience, with elders or more adept hunters guiding strategy while younger members executed the plan. This division of labor required trust, timing, and acute awareness of others' movements. The success of a hunt depended on the cohesion of the group as much as on the physical prowess of its members. Technology was crucial for survival and innovation. Spears, thrusting implements, and cutting tools had to be carefully fashioned, maintained, and utilized with expertise. Stone had to be selected, shaped, and attached to handles or shafts to maximize effectiveness. Bone and antler provided additional material for weapons, needles, and tools. Even the preparation and preservation of food demanded ingenuity. Meat could be dried, smoked, or stored in cool caves to last through periods of scarcity. Early humans demonstrated remarkable adaptability, applying observation and experimentation to solve practical problems, turning natural resources into instruments of survival. Timing and seasonality played pivotal roles in hunting strategies. Animal migration patterns, breeding cycles, and seasonal fat accumulation influenced when and where hunts were most likely to succeed. Ice and snow dictated movement, often concentrating prey into smaller areas but also making approach more treacherous. Hunters needed to anticipate these changes, adjusting their tactics in response to the shifting environment. Knowledge of the cycles of nature was thus inseparable from survival, forming a foundation of what we might now call ecological intelligence. Those who could read these patterns gained an enormous advantage, linking acute observation with strategic foresight. The psychological dimension of hunting cannot be understated. The stress of tracking, the anticipation of confrontation, and the need for split-second decisions required mental resilience. Hunters experienced fear, excitement, and heightened awareness, emotions that sharpened senses and focus. Repeated exposure to danger, combined with cultural training and social reinforcement, developed a psychological framework that allowed humans to remain composed under extreme pressure. Hunting was therefore both a physical and mental discipline, shaping not only the survival of individuals but also the cognitive capacities of the species as a whole. The hunt was deeply intertwined with social identity and cultural practice. Successful hunters were respected, and their skill conferred status within the group. Stories of hunts, victories, and the cunning or bravery involved became part of oral tradition, teaching both practical techniques and moral or philosophical lessons. These narratives reinforced cooperation, shared values, and collective memory. Hunting was more than subsistence, it was a cultural act, embedding social cohesion, tradition, and identity within the practical rhythms of survival. Hunting also required an intimate understanding of animal behavior. Predators and prey alike shaped human strategies. Knowledge of how reindeer reacted to snowdrifts, how mammoths responded to scent or sound, or how predators like wolves influenced prey movement allowed humans to predict and manipulate outcomes. Observation was continuous, requiring patience and acute attention to detail. Learning from mistakes, recording patterns in memory, and communicating findings to others created a sophisticated knowledge system rooted in direct engagement with the environment. Ice Age humans were not passive consumers of nature, they were active participants in a complex ecological web. The act of hunting fostered technological and tactical innovation. Early humans experimented with different spear designs, hunting formations, and methods of driving animals. Communal hunts may have involved the creation of barriers, the use of fire to guide movement, or coordinated ambushes that required precise timing and communication. Trial and error, combined with oral transmission of lessons, allowed these techniques to evolve, improving efficiency and safety over generations. Hunting was both laboratory and classroom, a crucible in which intelligence, ingenuity, and social cooperation were continuously tested and refined. Food acquisition extended beyond hunting to gathering and scavenging. Edible plants, nuts, and tubers were limited by seasonal availability, often frozen or buried beneath snow, requiring knowledge of survival techniques like digging, thawing, and storage. Scavenging from predator kills supplemented diets, demanding caution and opportunism. Early humans demonstrated flexibility, integrating hunting, gathering, and scavenging to create a resilient strategy for survival. The combination of observation, planning, and adaptability made humans uniquely capable of thriving in conditions that would have overwhelmed other species. The hunt shaped not only survival but the moral and philosophical dimensions of Ice Age life. The taking of life, the balance between risk and reward, and the dependence on communal effort instilled a complex sense of responsibility. Humans learned that survival was inseparable from respect for both prey and environment, and that ethical behavior, sharing, cooperation, and foresight, was often as critical as physical skill. The hunt was therefore a mirror reflecting both the harsh realities of life and the cognitive and moral frameworks that defined humanity's response to them. In essence, hunting during the Ice Age was the intersection of strategy, technology, psychology, and social structure. It required profound observation, cooperative effort, and innovation. It shaped identity, reinforced social bonds, and transmitted knowledge across generations. Every hunt carried the weight of risk and reward, teaching lessons in patience, courage, and foresight. In the frozen landscapes of the deep freeze era, the hunt was not merely an act of survival, it was a crucible in which the physical, intellectual, and social capacities of early humans were forged, a defining element of the human story that blended necessity with ingenuity, danger with understanding, and life with reflection. Hunting during the Ice Age was far more than a matter of sustenance, it was a defining element of human survival, ingenuity, and social organization. The frozen landscapes presented immense challenges, where every decision carried profound consequences, and the margin for error was razor-thin. Prey was often scarce, wary, and formidable, from massive mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses to elusive reindeer and bison. Humans had to understand animal behavior, terrain, weather patterns, and their own physical and technological limitations to succeed. Hunting was simultaneously a physical endeavor, a strategic operation, and a cognitive exercise that demanded foresight, planning, and the coordinated efforts of the group. The process began with observation. Humans spent hours, sometimes days, studying the habits of the animals they relied upon. Patterns of migration, feeding, breeding, and resting were meticulously noted, as were responses to predators and environmental changes. Even subtle signs, the direction of tracks in the snow, broken twigs, or the distribution of droppings, could reveal crucial information about movement and behavior. Hunters developed an intimate understanding of each species, combining keen perception with memory and deduction. This knowledge was accumulated over generations and shared orally through stories, rituals, and teaching, ensuring that survival strategies were preserved and refined. Tracking was both art and science. Early humans learned to interpret tracks with extraordinary precision, recognizing not just species but size, speed, and direction. Freshness of prints, depth of impression, and patterns in the snow conveyed information about urgency, health, or potential danger. Hunters could anticipate where an animal would move next, how it might react to human presence, and which approaches offered the highest chance of success. Tracking required patience and restraint, as a single misstep could alert prey or lead humans into peril. These skills were honed through repetition, observation, and a deep understanding of the landscape, merging intuition with empirical knowledge. Hunting strategies evolved with environmental demands and prey behavior. Ambushes, coordinated drives, and the use of natural terrain to channel animals into kill zones became central techniques. For larger prey, groups developed methods to isolate individuals from herds, exploiting their curiosity, aggression, or social instincts. Smaller prey required stealth, precision, and rapid response. The creation of tools and weapons, spears, atlatls, knives, and eventually bows, amplified human capacity, allowing hunters to engage at a distance, control risk, and target specific vulnerabilities. The sophistication of these tools reflected a combination of observation, experimentation, and collaboration, where innovation was rewarded with survival. Cooperative hunting was a defining feature of human success in the Ice Age. Individuals could achieve only so much alone, coordinated action magnified effectiveness. Groups communicated through gestures, calls, or signals to position themselves strategically, drive prey along predetermined routes, or execute flanking maneuvers. Timing, patience, and shared understanding were critical, as a single misstep could compromise the entire hunt. These collaborative efforts reinforced social cohesion, trust, and collective intelligence. Humans learned to anticipate the actions of others as carefully as they anticipated the behavior of prey, integrating social cognition into survival strategy. Preparation was meticulous. Hunters considered terrain, weather, wind direction, and the physiological state of both prey and participants. Clothing, fire, tools, and provisions were assessed, repaired, and optimized. Hiding spots, ambush points, and escape routes were planned in advance. Even the smallest misjudgment could be fatal, as hypothermia, injury, or predatory attacks were constant threats. Success depended on a combination of skill, knowledge, endurance, and adaptability, illustrating the complexity of what might superficially appear as a simple act of killing animals for food. The hunt itself demanded physical endurance and mental acuity. Moving silently through snow, scaling ridges, or crossing icy rivers tested strength, balance, and stamina. The thrill and danger of engagement elevated adrenaline, heightening awareness but also requiring controlled focus. Hunters needed to anticipate animal reactions, adjust strategy in real time, and communicate subtle signals to their companions. Each hunt was a high-stakes performance, blending instinct, learned skill, and strategy in a dynamic interaction with both environment and prey. Successful hunts had profound consequences for the group. Large prey could provide meat, hide, bones, and sinew for weeks or even months, sustaining multiple families and enabling preparation for the harshest seasons. Scarcity meant that a failed hunt could have severe repercussions, leading to hunger, weakened health, or social tension. The stakes amplified the significance of preparation, skill, and cooperation, embedding hunting not just as a practical activity but as a central pillar of group life and identity. The social and psychological pressures of hunting cultivated resilience, strategic thinking, and interdependence, fostering traits that would define human survival in extreme environments. Hunting also shaped technology and innovation. Spears, stone blades, and cutting implements evolved in response to specific prey challenges, reflecting careful observation of anatomy, behavior, and environmental conditions. Throwing mechanisms extended range and control, while traps and snares leveraged knowledge of animal instincts. Even clothing and footwear were influenced by hunting needs, providing mobility, warmth, and stealth. The interplay between human ingenuity and environmental constraint accelerated technological sophistication, illustrating a feedback loop where necessity drove innovation, and innovation expanded the possibilities for survival and adaptation. The psychological dimensions of hunting were profound. Success brought not only nourishment but social recognition, status, and enhanced influence within the group. Hunters were celebrated, their knowledge and skill forming a repository of communal wisdom. Failures, by contrast, offered lessons in humility, observation, and adaptation, reinforcing the value of patience, attentiveness, and learning from experience. Hunting was therefore both practical and formative, shaping identity, cognition, and social dynamics in ways that extended far beyond the immediate capture of food. Hunting rituals likely emerged alongside practical strategies. Ceremonial preparation, marking of kills, and ritualized consumption may have reinforced social cohesion, transmitted knowledge, and expressed reverence for the animals that sustained life. These practices blurred the lines between survival, culture, and spirituality, creating a holistic approach to the natural world. Respect for prey, acknowledgement of risk, and celebration of skill all contributed to a sense of balance between human necessity and environmental reality, a philosophy born directly from experience and observation. Seasonal variation influenced hunting practices profoundly. Winter required different strategies than summer, frozen terrain could facilitate or hinder movement, migration patterns shifted, and prey behavior changed in response to scarcity and cold. Humans adapted through flexibility, observation, and planning, timing hunts to coincide with optimal conditions and resource availability. Knowledge of seasonal cycles, animal ecology, and environmental cues became deeply embedded in human culture, informing migration, settlement, and social organization. Hunting was inseparable from the rhythms of the Ice Age landscape, a dialogue between human intelligence and ecological reality. Hunting also fostered long-term planning and foresight. Preserving meat through drying, smoking, or freezing ensured food security during lean months. Bone and sinew were stored for tools, clothing, or shelter construction. The surplus allowed humans to invest in social structures, cultural practices, and knowledge transmission. Hunting was thus not merely an immediate survival activity but a foundation for broader human development, linking resource acquisition to technology, culture, and cognition. The Ice Age shaped humans into planners, innovators, and collaborators, their intellect honed by the constant challenge of obtaining sustenance in extreme conditions. In essence, hunting during the Ice Age encapsulated the full spectrum of human adaptation. It demanded observation, patience, strategy, cooperation, physical skill, and technological innovation. It reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and nurtured culture and identity. Every successful hunt was a triumph over nature's challenges, a testament to intelligence, ingenuity, and resilience. Through the act of tracking, planning, and executing hunts, humans not only survived, they evolved culturally, cognitively, and socially. Hunting was the crucible in which early humans forged the skills, knowledge, and cooperation that would define their species, ensuring survival in a world dominated by ice, danger, and scarcity. It exemplified the integration of mind, body, and community, illuminating the remarkable capacity of humans to adapt, endure, and thrive in one of the harshest environments ever faced by any species. The legacy of Ice Age hunting extends beyond the mere act of procuring food. It shaped human evolution biologically, with diets rich in protein and fat supporting brain development. Socially, it reinforced communication, cooperation, and leadership. Culturally, it fostered storytelling, ritual, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. The strategies, tools, and techniques developed in these harsh conditions laid the foundation for later innovations, influencing human interaction with the environment for millennia. Hunting, in this context, was not just a survival mechanism, it was a transformative force, shaping cognition, society, and culture, and demonstrating the profound intelligence and adaptability of early humans. Through hunting, humans engaged in an intimate, dynamic, and reciprocal relationship with their environment. They learned to read signs, anticipate behavior, and respond with precision. They balanced risk and reward, patience and action, observation and intervention. Every hunt was an exercise in critical thinking, coordination, and creativity, merging instinct with knowledge and survival with innovation. In the unforgiving landscapes of the Deep Freeze era, hunting was not merely an activity, it was the essence of human adaptation, a testament to the resilience, intelligence, and ingenuity that would define the species for millennia to come. By combining observation, technology, social collaboration, and ritual, Ice Age humans turned the act of hunting into a sophisticated system that ensured survival, nurtured community, and fostered cultural growth. The frozen tundras, glacial plains, and snow-covered valleys were arenas in which humans honed skills that transcended the immediate need for sustenance, shaping cognition, culture, and society. Hunting demanded the integration of every aspect of human capability: physical endurance, intellectual insight, emotional resilience, social intelligence, and technological innovation. It was through this intricate interplay that humans learned not merely to exist in the Deep Freeze era, but to thrive, adapt, and lay the foundation for the civilizations that would emerge long after the ice had receded. The Ice Age was a period defined not only by frigid temperatures and vast glaciers but also by the extraordinary adaptability and ingenuity of humans who navigated this harsh world. In these frozen landscapes, survival was a continuous negotiation between environmental challenges and human ingenuity. Each aspect of life, from clothing and shelter to hunting, social organization, and mental resilience, was intertwined, creating a complex web of strategies that allowed humans to endure conditions that would have easily overwhelmed other species. Among these strategies, hunting and the acquisition of food were central, demanding not only physical prowess but intelligence, observation, and cooperation. The quest for sustenance in such an extreme climate provides a lens through which to understand both the vulnerability and the remarkable capabilities of early humans. In the Deep Freeze era, the availability of food was a constant concern. Flora was limited by the cold, with vegetation sparse and seasonal, often restricted to lower latitudes or sheltered valleys. Humans relied heavily on fauna for both nutrition and materials. Large mammals such as mammoths, bison, and reindeer offered high-calorie meat, hides for clothing, and bones for tools and shelter construction. Smaller game, fish, birds, and even insects supplemented the diet, reflecting a deep understanding of ecological niches and animal behaviors. Humans had to be both opportunistic and strategic, balancing immediate needs with long-term sustainability, and anticipating the movements and availability of prey over vast distances. Tracking animals in snowy and icy terrain required acute observation and knowledge of behavior. Footprints, droppings, feeding marks, and seasonal patterns provided clues that enabled hunters to predict the location and timing of game. Ice and snow acted as both challenge and opportunity. While they limited mobility and increased exposure to the elements, they also preserved tracks and provided frozen surfaces that facilitated pursuit or ambush. Early humans developed sophisticated tracking techniques, learning to interpret subtle environmental signs, anticipate animal behavior, and coordinate movements in groups. This intelligence, combined with physical endurance, allowed humans to hunt successfully in conditions that would have been lethal to those lacking such skills. Hunting large mammals required cooperation, planning, and innovation. Groups often coordinated drives, where animals were herded toward ambush points, natural traps, or prepared pitfalls. Spears, atlatls, and later more complex weapons allowed humans to strike from a distance, reducing risk while increasing efficiency. Hunting was not an individual endeavor, it depended on trust, communication, and shared risk. Successful hunts reinforced social cohesion, while failure could have severe consequences, highlighting the precarious balance between ingenuity and necessity. Each hunt was an exercise in applied strategy, combining knowledge of the environment, the prey, and the group's own capabilities. The preparation and processing of meat were equally critical. Butchering required skill and knowledge to extract maximum nutrition while preserving food for later consumption. Fat, marrow, and organ meats provided essential calories and nutrients, particularly during the coldest months when energy demands were highest. Preservation techniques, such as drying, smoking, or freezing, extended the availability of food and enabled planning over weeks or months. The division of labor in processing animals reinforced social structures, as different members contributed according to skill, strength, or experience. These practices exemplify the integration of physical, social, and cognitive strategies in the pursuit of survival. Fishing and foraging supplemented hunting, particularly in regions where plant life could survive despite cold conditions. Early humans identified edible roots, seeds, nuts, and berries, understanding their seasonal cycles and toxicity. Knowledge of water sources, ice behavior, and aquatic species allowed for efficient exploitation of resources. Tools such as hooks, nets, and traps demonstrate the ingenuity applied to even small-scale food acquisition, reflecting an understanding of ecological principles and engineering. In combination with hunting, these strategies created a diversified diet capable of sustaining groups through periods of scarcity. Fire played a central role in hunting and food preparation. It provided warmth during long tracking expeditions, preserved food by cooking or smoking, and deterred predators from scavenging around kills. Fire also facilitated complex processing techniques, such as boiling marrow or softening hides for clothing. The ability to transport and maintain fire across landscapes extended the reach of humans into colder, more remote areas, effectively amplifying survival capabilities. Mastery of fire transformed hunting from a purely physical challenge into a strategic, multi-step process that involved planning, coordination, and technological skill. Hunting was also deeply intertwined with knowledge transmission. Skills were taught through observation, demonstration, and repetition, ensuring that each generation inherited not only techniques but also understanding of animal behavior, seasonal migration, and ecological balance. These lessons were encoded in stories, rituals, and symbolic practices, blending practical knowledge with culture. Hunting thus became a vector for both survival and cultural continuity, reinforcing social cohesion while shaping the cognitive and moral frameworks of the group. It was through these activities that humans learned to anticipate consequences, plan collaboratively, and negotiate risk, laying foundations for abstract thinking and foresight. The psychological aspects of hunting were as crucial as the physical. The Ice Age environment imposed constant stress, from extreme cold and exhaustion to uncertainty about prey availability. Hunters needed patience, persistence, and the ability to endure discomfort. Fear, both of predators and of failure, required management, and success demanded calm, precise action under pressure. These mental qualities were reinforced socially. Encouragement, instruction, and shared experience cultivated resilience and confidence. Hunting became a crucible not only for sustenance but for character, shaping the emotional and cognitive capacities essential for enduring extreme environments. Moreover, hunting fostered innovation in tools and strategy. Each encounter with prey generated insights that led to improvements in weapons, traps, and tracking methods. Experimentation was constant. The behavior of animals, seasonal variations, and environmental conditions forced humans to adapt continuously. The Ice Age thus served as a catalyst for technological evolution, with survival imperatives driving creativity and problem-solving. From sharpened flint spearheads to coordinated ambushes, every aspect of hunting reflected the merging of intellect, observation, and physical capability in response to environmental challenges. Hunting and food acquisition also reinforced social hierarchy and specialization. Skilled hunters, strategists, or those who could predict animal behavior gained influence and respect within the group. Leadership often emerged organically around those who could provide the most reliable guidance, demonstrating that survival was linked not only to physical ability but to knowledge, experience, and social intelligence. Shared success in hunts reinforced trust, obligation, and reciprocity, embedding complex social dynamics within practical survival activities. The distribution of food, preparation of shared meals, and care for vulnerable members reflected ethical and strategic decision-making that bound the community together. In the broader context, hunting shaped migration and settlement patterns. Humans followed the seasonal movements of animals, moving across landscapes with acute awareness of terrain, climate, and resource availability. Camps and shelters were located strategically along these routes, integrating knowledge of prey behavior with environmental features. Hunting dictated rhythms of life, aligning human activity with natural cycles and fostering a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of life and climate. These patterns reveal not only practical adaptation but philosophical engagement with the environment, reflecting an early awareness of dependence and reciprocity within the ecosystem. Ultimately, the Ice Age hunt was a multidimensional endeavor, encompassing physical exertion, cognitive skill, social coordination, emotional resilience, and cultural transmission. Humans navigated an unforgiving landscape with tools, strategies, and intelligence that allowed them to survive and thrive despite extreme scarcity and danger. Hunting was not merely about food, it was about understanding the environment, mastering skills, fostering community, and shaping human identity. It was a crucible in which intellect, cooperation, and creativity were tested and refined, creating the foundations for culture, technology, and social complexity that would endure long after the glaciers began to retreat. In the frozen expanse of the deep freeze era, hunting was the thread that connected survival to ingenuity, and life to the enduring human capacity to adapt, innovate, and endure. The deep and relentless cold of the Ice Age presented challenges to human survival that extended far beyond the immediate struggle for warmth, food, and shelter. The human body, although remarkably adaptable, faced continuous threats from frostbite, hypothermia, malnutrition, and the physiological stress imposed by extreme cold. Survival demanded a profound understanding of one's own biology, the environment, and the interplay between them. Over generations, early humans developed not only physical resilience but also behavioral strategies, technologies, and cultural adaptations that allowed them to endure conditions that would have overwhelmed any species less inventive or socially cohesive. The interplay between human biology and environmental pressures in the deep freeze era was both complex and dynamic, shaping the very course of human evolution. The physiological demands of extreme cold forced humans to optimize energy usage and thermoregulation. The body's core temperature needed to be maintained around 37 degrees Celsius, despite surrounding temperatures that could drop well below freezing for extended periods. Shivering, vasoconstriction, and the redistribution of blood flow to protect vital organs became critical survival mechanisms. Peripheral extremities such as fingers, toes, and ears were especially vulnerable, requiring constant protection through clothing and shelter. Repeated exposure to cold over time may have also driven subtle evolutionary adaptations, such as increased basal metabolic rates and altered fat distribution, favoring the accumulation of insulating subcutaneous fat to preserve heat. These physiological pressures were relentless, and survival was contingent upon both innate adaptation and learned behavior. Behavioral adaptations were equally vital. Humans developed meticulous strategies to conserve and generate heat, including huddling for warmth, creating insulated sleeping areas, and carefully managing fire. The strategic use of microclimates, such as sheltered valleys, caves, and natural windbreaks, allowed groups to exploit the environment in ways that minimized energy expenditure. Activities were often timed to coincide with the availability of resources or the warmest parts of the day, and work was divided to ensure that the physically weaker or more vulnerable members of the group were protected. These strategies demonstrate an acute understanding of both environmental dynamics and human physiology, and the behaviors were often codified through observation, tradition, and communal teaching. Nutrition played a central role in maintaining resilience against the cold. Caloric demands were significantly higher than in temperate environments, as the body required additional energy to fuel heat production. Diets rich in protein and fat, derived from large game, fish, and small mammals, provided the energy necessary to sustain activity and thermogenesis. Carbohydrates from gathered plants, nuts, and tubers supplemented nutrition and provided essential vitamins and minerals. Humans learned to combine these food sources strategically, sometimes prioritizing fatty cuts during the coldest months, preserving meat and fat through drying or smoking, and storing excess in insulated shelters. The Ice Age diet was thus a carefully managed system, balancing immediate caloric needs with long-term sustainability in a challenging environment. Clothing and shelter were extensions of physiological and behavioral adaptation. Garments made from furs, hides, and layered textiles acted as portable insulation, while shelters provided microclimates that reduced energy expenditure and risk of exposure. The construction, maintenance, and repair of clothing and shelters required knowledge passed through generations, demonstrating an early integration of cultural transmission with survival strategy. This interplay between technology and biology created a feedback loop. Improved clothing and shelter allowed humans to withstand colder temperatures, which in turn expanded their range, facilitated hunting, and reinforced social cohesion, enhancing survival and reproductive success. Social structures played a pivotal role in mediating the stresses imposed by extreme cold. Cooperative behaviors were not merely advantageous, they were essential. Groups that coordinated hunting, foraged collectively, and maintained communal shelters had higher survival rates. Sharing of resources, such as food, fire, and clothing, mitigated the impact of scarcity, while social teaching ensured that knowledge about survival techniques, navigation, and environmental cues was transmitted effectively. Conflict had to be managed carefully, as fracturing of social units could be fatal. Ice Age humans likely developed social norms and informal rules that regulated sharing, leadership, and collective responsibility, embedding cooperative behavior deeply into cultural and social practice. Psychological resilience was an equally critical component of survival. The monotony, isolation, and unpredictability of Ice Age life would have imposed mental strain, and humans developed mechanisms to cope with stress and maintain motivation. Storytelling, ritual, and symbolic expression provided outlets for processing fear, grief, and uncertainty, while reinforcing knowledge and social cohesion. The creation of cave art, carvings, and musical instruments likely served both emotional and practical purposes, strengthening group identity, teaching survival lessons, and fostering a sense of agency in an environment that could otherwise feel overwhelming. Emotional intelligence, empathy, and foresight became not only social tools but cognitive strategies for enduring extreme hardship. The environment itself shaped human mobility and settlement patterns, influencing physiological stress and survival strategies. Glacial advances, shifting river courses, and seasonal changes dictated the availability of game, water, and plant resources. Humans had to track these changes carefully, predicting migrations of prey and adjusting their own movements accordingly. This required a sophisticated mental mapping of landscapes, weather patterns, and resource distribution, combined with the ability to communicate and coordinate within groups. Individuals had to navigate both physical and social landscapes simultaneously, ensuring that survival strategies were implemented consistently across the group. Failure to anticipate environmental shifts could lead to starvation, exposure, or conflict over dwindling resources, reinforcing the interdependence of ecological knowledge, social cohesion, and adaptive behavior. Ice Age humans also developed techniques to manipulate and exploit the environment to reduce physiological stress. Fire was used not only for warmth but for cooking, preserving food, and even modifying landscapes to manage game movement. Clothing and shelter reduced heat loss and protected against frostbite, allowing extended activity in extreme cold. Tools for hunting, processing food, and constructing shelters amplified human physical capabilities, offsetting the limitations imposed by the environment. Each of these innovations reflects a dynamic feedback loop. Environmental pressure drove technological and behavioral adaptation, which in turn shaped social organization, cognition, and survival outcomes. Humans were not passive victims of the Ice Age, they were active participants, shaping and reshaping their world in order to endure. The cumulative effect of these physiological, behavioral, and cultural adaptations was profound. Human populations in the Ice Age displayed remarkable resilience, extending into regions of extreme cold that would have been lethal without such innovations. Survival was never guaranteed, but the combination of cooperation, knowledge transmission, technological ingenuity, and psychological resilience allowed humans to endure for generations. These adaptations laid the foundation for later developments in social complexity, culture, and technological sophistication, highlighting how extreme environmental pressure can catalyze evolutionary and cultural innovation. Ultimately, the survival strategies developed during the Ice Age were a testament to human flexibility, intelligence, and ingenuity. Humans learned to manage energy, protect themselves, and exploit resources in ways that maximized the probability of survival. They integrated physiology, behavior, and culture into a coherent system capable of withstanding conditions that were extraordinarily hostile. The Deep Freeze era was a crucible in which not only physical resilience but cognitive, social, and cultural capacities were tested and strengthened. Through these experiences, humans emerged more adaptable, socially cohesive, and technologically adept, leaving a legacy that would echo far beyond the frozen landscapes in which they first learned to endure. The Ice Age was more than a period of survival, it was a defining chapter in the evolution of human resilience, shaping the species' capacity to thrive in even the most extreme circumstances, and demonstrating that adaptability, knowledge, and cooperation were as crucial as any physical trait in the long struggle against nature. The Ice Age was not merely a series of environmental challenges, it was a crucible in which human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability were tested to their limits. Among the most profound challenges faced by early humans was disease, a silent, often invisible adversary that could strike as unpredictably as the shifting glaciers. In the harsh, cold landscapes of the Deep Freeze era, pathogens and parasites interacted with environmental stressors to create conditions in which survival required not only physical strength but also knowledge, observation, and communal cooperation. Disease shaped human evolution, behavior, and social structures in ways that were both immediate and far-reaching, influencing mortality, movement, and even cultural practices. In an era without modern medicine, the human body was both a fortress and a vulnerability. Nutritional stress, cold exposure, and injuries from hunting or travel increased susceptibility to infection. Malnutrition weakened immune responses, making even minor wounds prone to serious infection. Frostbite, cuts, and abrasions were not merely physical inconveniences, they were potential gateways for bacteria and other pathogens. Early humans had to be vigilant in wound care, developing practices that reduced infection risk, such as cleaning cuts with water, rubbing them with ashes, or applying plant-based antiseptics. Though rudimentary, these measures reflected empirical observation, an understanding that the body could be supported, even without scientific knowledge, through careful attention and experimentation. Parasitic infections posed a constant threat. Lice, fleas, intestinal worms, and other parasites could sap energy, weaken the body, and in some cases lead to severe illness. Living in close quarters, sharing bedding and clothing, increased transmission risk. Humans responded with behavioral adaptations, washing, airing out shelters, rotating sleeping areas, and using fire to disinfect hides or bedding. Knowledge of plant-based repellents or treatments may have emerged from trial and error, with certain herbs or roots identified as deterrents or palliatives. These early medical practices were closely intertwined with survival knowledge, demonstrating a sophisticated empirical understanding of the interplay between environment, behavior, and health. Epidemics, while less documented, were likely significant. High-density gatherings during hunting seasons, communal shelters, or seasonal migrations created opportunities for contagious diseases to spread. Illness could decimate groups, particularly when compounded by food scarcity or harsh weather. In response, humans may have practiced forms of isolation, either consciously or instinctively, keeping the sick apart to protect the wider community. This behavior reflects the early roots of public health principles, where observation and experience guided preventive action. Survival depended not just on individual endurance but on collective management of risk, balancing compassion with pragmatic protection. Chronic illnesses, including arthritis, tooth decay, and degenerative conditions, also shaped daily life. Hard labor, repetitive movements, and a diet heavy in tough meats and fibrous plants placed stress on joints and teeth. Injuries sustained during hunting or confrontations with predators could leave lasting disability. Yet evidence suggests that communities cared for injured or ill members, supporting them through provision of food, warmth, and shelter. This reflects the emergence of empathy, social cohesion, and cooperative behavior as evolutionary advantages. The ability to protect and assist the vulnerable enhanced group survival, ensuring that knowledge, skills, and experience were preserved despite physical setbacks. Cultural responses to disease were likely intertwined with spiritual and symbolic practices. Illness may have been interpreted as a manifestation of imbalance, displeasure of supernatural forces, or as a test of endurance. Rituals, charms, or symbolic acts could serve multiple purposes: psychological comfort, social cohesion, and practical reinforcement of care. Storytelling around illness may have encoded lessons about hygiene, risky behaviors, or environmental hazards. In this way, disease influenced not only biology but also cognition and culture, shaping moral, ethical, and practical knowledge that persisted across generations. The interplay between disease and migration was significant. Movement to new territories could reduce exposure to pathogens endemic in one area, but it also introduced novel risks. Humans entering new ecosystems encountered unfamiliar parasites, microbes, and foodborne pathogens. Their survival depended on rapid observation, experimentation, and adaptation, whether by altering diet, modifying water sources, or adjusting shelter practices. Migration was not solely driven by resources or climate, it was also a strategy for navigating the invisible landscape of disease, demonstrating an early form of epidemiological reasoning based on empirical evidence and observation. Diet and nutrition were central in disease prevention and resilience. Access to high-fat, high-protein foods supported immune function, while plant-based foods provided essential vitamins and micronutrients. Humans developed storage, cooking, and preservation techniques to ensure a consistent and safe food supply. Cooking not only enhanced digestibility but also reduced microbial load in meat and other perishables. Techniques such as smoking, drying, and fermenting may have emerged as strategies to protect against spoilage and associated illness. The interconnection of food, fire, and shelter highlights how holistic survival strategies mitigated disease risk, combining multiple layers of knowledge and skill. Knowledge of medicinal plants likely played a critical role. Early humans experimented with roots, leaves, barks, and fungi, discovering compounds that could reduce pain, inflammation, or infection. Even without understanding biochemistry, empirical results guided repeated use and transmission of knowledge. Certain plants may have been incorporated into daily routines, mixed with food or applied topically, forming a protopharmacopoeia. This body of knowledge was preserved and communicated orally, often integrated with storytelling, ritual, and observation of animal behavior, as animals were sometimes seen consuming plants that alleviated illness or discomfort. Disease also influenced social structure and cooperation. Caring for the sick required coordinated effort, attention to detail, and allocation of resources. Those who could not contribute physically were nonetheless valuable for knowledge, guidance, or observation. This fostered empathy and social resilience, ensuring the survival of both individuals and the group. Understanding and responding to disease strengthened community bonds, reinforcing trust and interdependence. The management of illness became not merely a biological challenge but a social and cognitive one, shaping the evolution of human cooperation and intelligence. Furthermore, the experience of disease likely had psychological consequences, shaping risk perception, decision-making, and cultural identity. Fear of illness may have influenced movement patterns, hunting practices, and social interactions. Stories of survival or loss could encode lessons, fostering caution and collective memory. Humans developed strategies not only to respond to disease but to anticipate it, demonstrating foresight and adaptive cognition. The interplay of fear, knowledge, and social behavior created a cultural framework in which survival was inseparable from observation, experimentation, and communal learning. In essence, disease during the Ice Age was both adversary and teacher. It demanded vigilance, ingenuity, and cooperation, shaping human evolution biologically, cognitively, and socially. From parasites and infections to chronic conditions and epidemics, humans responded with a combination of empirical knowledge, practical innovation, and social care. Fire, diet, hygiene, medicinal plants, and communal strategies all intersected to mitigate risk and enhance resilience. Disease influenced migration, settlement, social structure, and cultural development, weaving itself into the fabric of survival. The presence of disease amplified the stakes of every decision. Hunting, foraging, and migration carried not only immediate risks but potential exposure to pathogens. Shelter and clothing were evaluated not only for warmth but for cleanliness and protection. Food was prepared with attention to safety and preservation. Communities functioned as cooperative networks, each member contributing to the resilience of the whole. Empathy, observation, and experimentation became as essential as fire, clothing, and weapons, highlighting the multifaceted intelligence required to endure the deep freeze era. Ultimately, disease was an invisible force that shaped human adaptation and cultural evolution. It catalyzed technological innovation, reinforced social cohesion, and fostered empirical observation and experimentation. Survival was not merely a matter of physical endurance, it required holistic strategies integrating body, mind, and community. In the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, humans faced not only the cold, predators, and scarcity but the constant, pervasive threat of illness. Their response to disease demonstrates the depth of human ingenuity and resilience, illustrating how the challenges of the deep freeze era forged not only bodies capable of survival but minds and societies capable of enduring, learning, and thriving in the face of invisible yet formidable threats. The end of the Ice Age was not a single moment, but a slow, shifting transition, a transformation of landscapes, climates, and the very fabric of human life. For tens of thousands of years, humans had adapted to a world dominated by ice and snow, developing technologies, social structures, and strategies that enabled them to endure extreme cold, scarce resources, and relentless environmental challenges. But as the glaciers began to retreat, rivers swelled, and vegetation shifted, humans faced a new kind of challenge: how to navigate abundance, change, and the uncertain rhythms of a warming world. This period of transformation was not merely environmental, it reshaped culture, cognition, and the trajectory of human evolution itself. The retreat of the ice sheets gradually altered the geography of the continents. Vast expanses that had been buried under kilometers of ice slowly revealed fertile plains, lakes, and rivers, offering opportunities for settlement, hunting, and foraging. Areas that had been inhospitable now became viable for habitation. Humans, who had been largely migratory, following herds and seasonal cycles, found pockets of stability where resources could be exploited more consistently. This shift encouraged semi-permanent or permanent settlements, marking a subtle but profound change in human social organization. The landscape itself, once a barrier and a threat, became a canvas for new forms of adaptation and ingenuity. The warming climate also transformed ecosystems. Flora and fauna that had been constrained by the ice returned or expanded into newly exposed regions. Trees, shrubs, and grasses spread across valleys, creating diverse habitats that supported smaller game, birds, and plant resources. Human diets diversified as previously scarce edible plants became accessible, supplementing the traditional focus on large game hunting. Knowledge of the environment had to evolve accordingly. New plant species required identification, preparation, and storage. New animal behaviors had to be observed and understood. The pace and unpredictability of these ecological shifts demanded flexibility, cognitive agility, and cultural adaptation, forcing humans to continually revise the strategies that had ensured survival during the deep freeze era. Hunting strategies evolved alongside these environmental changes. As megafauna such as mammoths, giant deer, and woolly rhinoceroses declined due to climate shifts and possibly human pressure, groups relied more on smaller, more abundant animals. This required a combination of new tools, refined tracking skills, and cooperative tactics suited to capturing quicker, more elusive prey. Weapons and traps were adapted to different sizes and types of animals, reflecting an ongoing sophistication in technology and knowledge. Humans who had once relied on brute force and endurance in hunting now increasingly incorporated ingenuity, observation, and subtlety. The decline of large game was not merely a loss of calories, it was a catalyst for innovation and adaptation in hunting, resource management, and social coordination. Food preservation and storage became more critical than ever. Seasonal abundance, such as berry harvests or migration of fish and smaller game, required humans to develop techniques to extend the availability of resources into leaner periods. Drying, smoking, and storing in insulated shelters ensured that surplus could be conserved. Communities began to anticipate cycles of plenty and scarcity with increasing precision, reflecting a shift from reactive survival to proactive resource management. The ability to plan, preserve, and distribute food over time laid the groundwork for more complex social hierarchies, cooperation, and the emergence of ritualized or symbolic practices associated with resource stewardship. Settlement patterns began to change as well. The availability of more stable food sources allowed groups to inhabit areas for longer periods. Semi-permanent dwellings evolved, often constructed with greater sophistication in materials and layout, reflecting knowledge accumulated over generations. Social structures became more intricate, as longer habitation demanded coordination, labor specialization, and management of resources. Interpersonal relationships, cooperation, and social norms were reinforced, fostering cultural continuity and the transmission of complex knowledge. Settlement was no longer merely about protection from the elements, it became a center for innovation, cultural identity, and communal life. Cultural and artistic expression flourished in this transitional period. The knowledge and techniques developed during the harshest winters could now be applied in contexts of relative abundance. Cave art, carvings, and symbolic objects reflected not only survival strategies but also philosophical reflection, identity, and storytelling. Humans began to externalize memory, knowledge, and culture in ways that would endure long after individual lives ended. Art and ritual became intertwined with survival, social cohesion, and ecological awareness. The expansion of symbolic thinking, combined with environmental change, encouraged humans to reflect on their place in the world and their relationship with both other species and the land itself. Climatic shifts also prompted migration and interaction between previously isolated groups. As ice sheets receded and new territories opened, humans explored unfamiliar regions, encountering other human groups, species, and cultures. Exchange of knowledge, mating networks, and social alliances became more frequent, introducing new genetic diversity and cultural exchange. This movement fostered adaptability, resilience, and cognitive growth, as humans integrated novel strategies, tools, and practices into their existing repertoires. Migration during the transition out of the Ice Age was not just physical, it was cognitive and social, expanding the capacity for innovation and cultural complexity. The end of the Ice Age also brought uncertainty. Unpredictable weather patterns, fluctuating water levels, and the transformation of familiar landscapes required constant vigilance and adaptation. Humans had to balance the opportunities of abundance with the risks of instability. Droughts, floods, and storms could disrupt food supplies, settlements, and social networks, challenging groups to maintain resilience. Knowledge of environmental patterns, learned over millennia, remained essential, but the shifting baseline demanded flexibility and foresight. Adaptation was continuous. Survival was no longer merely about enduring cold but navigating complexity, variability, and novelty. Technological innovation accelerated during this period. New tools, such as specialized fishing implements, grinding stones, and composite weapons, reflected an integration of knowledge from hunting, foraging, and observation. Clothing and shelter adapted to changing conditions, while fire and cooking techniques were refined to accommodate different resources and longer settlement periods. Humans were no longer reacting solely to the pressures of extreme cold, they were shaping the environment in subtle ways, manipulating resources, and optimizing survival through innovation. Technology became a bridge between observation, creativity, and social organization, amplifying human agency in an increasingly dynamic world. Social structures evolved in parallel. Group sizes could expand with more reliable resources, and roles became more specialized. Leadership, coordination, and decision-making were required to manage settlements, food stores, and interactions with neighboring groups. Cooperation, cultural transmission, and shared problem-solving became central to survival and flourishing. Social cohesion was reinforced by shared challenges, rituals, and the collective management of resources. In essence, human societies were becoming more complex, with cultural and social practices reflecting not only survival needs but also cognitive and symbolic growth. Perhaps most profoundly, the end of the Ice Age marked a shift in human perception of the world. From enduring relentless cold and scarcity, humans moved into landscapes where observation, foresight, and planning could be applied in contexts of both danger and opportunity. The mastery of fire, clothing, shelter, hunting, and environmental observation now converged with emerging settlement, resource management, and cultural practices. Humans were no longer simply adapting to extremes, they were shaping their world, creating continuity, memory, and identity that extended beyond immediate survival. The end of the Ice Age was a period of transformation not only for the environment but for humanity itself, laying the foundation for agriculture, permanent settlements, and the complex societies that would eventually dominate the planet. In retrospect, the Ice Age's conclusion was a triumph of resilience, ingenuity, and adaptation. Every tool, garment, shelter, and strategy developed during millennia of freezing temperatures was repurposed, refined, and expanded to meet the demands of a changing world. Humans who had survived the harshest conditions were now equipped to navigate abundance, unpredictability, and social complexity. The knowledge embedded in culture, technology, and social practice became a bridge from survival to civilization, illustrating the profound capacity of humans to observe, learn, innovate, and reflect. In the deep freeze era, the Ice Age had forged a species capable not only of enduring extremes but of envisioning, shaping, and thriving in a world transformed by time, climate, and ingenuity. This transitional era underscores a central truth: survival is never merely about reacting to the environment, it is about understanding, anticipating, and creatively engaging with it. The end of the Ice Age transformed humans from reactive survivors into proactive navigators of the world, integrating technology, social cohesion, observation, and culture into a sophisticated framework of resilience. Every strategy honed in the frozen landscapes, the mastery of fire, the making of clothing, the construction of shelter, the careful tracking of prey, the observation of predators, and the understanding of environmental cycles, was now applied in a new context of opportunity and challenge. This continuity and adaptation forged the trajectory of humanity, connecting the Ice Age to the emergence of settled life, symbolic thought, and the foundations of civilization itself. The lessons of the Ice Age echo far beyond survival. They reveal the interplay of environment, ingenuity, social coordination, and reflective intelligence in shaping human destiny. The retreat of glaciers and the warming of the planet were not endpoints but catalysts, prompting humans to rethink, innovate, and expand the reach of their knowledge and culture. Adaptation was not merely physical, it was cognitive, social, and symbolic. Humans had learned to endure extreme cold, scarcity, and danger, and in doing so had cultivated the tools, strategies, and capacities that would enable them to thrive in worlds both harsh and abundant. The end of the Ice Age stands as a testament to the enduring ingenuity of humanity, a profound reminder that resilience, foresight, and creativity are as critical to survival as strength or skill, and that adaptation is always both a physical and a philosophical journey. Ice Age humans were bound to the landscape not only physically but emotionally and spiritually, forming relationships with the world around them that went beyond mere survival. The frozen expanses were harsh and unforgiving, yet they were also rich in life, movement, and mystery. Humans developed a profound awareness of their surroundings, observing patterns in animals, weather, and terrain while also imbuing these observations with meaning. This interplay between practical knowledge and emotional engagement fostered a deep connection to the environment, shaping early human culture, belief, and identity in ways that were both tangible and intangible. Ritual and symbolism likely emerged as humans sought to make sense of the forces around them. Cave paintings, carvings, and arrangements of bones and stones may have served not only functional purposes but also symbolic ones, connecting humans to the cycles of life, death, and survival. Depictions of animals, hunts, and natural phenomena may have expressed reverence, hope, or an attempt to influence the unseen forces that governed existence. These practices reflect a cognitive leap. Humans were not merely reacting to the environment but reflecting on it, interpreting their place within it, and attempting to assert agency over forces beyond their control. Social bonds were reinforced through shared experience and collective interpretation of the world. The hardships of the deep freeze era demanded cooperation, and emotional resilience was as critical as physical strength. Storytelling, shared rituals, and communal work around fire or shelter allowed groups to internalize lessons, express empathy, and celebrate successes. Humans recognized the importance of nurturing trust and solidarity, understanding that individual survival was inseparable from the health of the group. In this way, emotional intelligence became intertwined with physical survival, shaping the culture, morality, and social norms of Ice Age communities. Humans also displayed curiosity and wonder in response to the natural world. Snowstorms, auroras, migrating herds, and the rhythm of the seasons may have inspired awe, fear, or reverence. This emotional engagement was not purely passive, it informed decision-making, creativity, and cultural expression. Art, ritual, and oral tradition allowed humans to process and transmit experiences of wonder and danger alike, embedding reflection and memory into community life. These emotional responses strengthened resilience, providing psychological tools for enduring the extreme conditions of the Ice Age. The concept of territory and landscape management emerged as humans interacted with their environment over long periods. Knowledge of hunting grounds, migration routes, shelter locations, and resource availability created a mental map that guided movement and strategy. Humans did not simply survive in a static world, they tracked, anticipated, and sometimes modified their surroundings, shaping ecosystems through selective hunting, fire use, and settlement. This interaction demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of cause and effect, reflecting both observation and foresight, and it laid the foundation for a lasting relationship with the land that would influence generations to come. Death and mortality were constant companions, shaping emotional and philosophical understanding. Encounters with predators, harsh winters, and failed hunts underscored the fragility of life. Humans developed strategies for coping with loss, honoring the dead, and transmitting knowledge to ensure the survival of the living. Burial practices, symbolic arrangements, or artistic expressions may have emerged from these reflections, representing an early grappling with the concepts of impermanence and continuity. This awareness of mortality deepened the human connection to community, culture, and the broader environment, reinforcing both practical and ethical dimensions of survival. In essence, Ice Age humans were not passive creatures of instinct but reflective, emotional beings, navigating extreme landscapes with intellect, creativity, and empathy. Their survival depended not only on tools, fire, clothing, and food but on the ability to interpret, understand, and emotionally engage with the world. The frozen expanse of the deep freeze era shaped not only human bodies and technology but also minds, culture, and emotional life. Humans learned to coexist with danger, appreciate beauty, form cohesive communities, and reflect on their place within a vast and indifferent natural world. This profound intertwining of survival, observation, emotion, and reflection marked the emergence of a uniquely human consciousness, one capable of enduring the harshest climates while laying the groundwork for culture, philosophy, and imagination that would endure far beyond the ice. The end of the Ice Age marked a profound transformation for humanity, a period where survival, adaptation, and ingenuity converged to set the stage for the world as we know it today. For tens of thousands of years, humans had endured the relentless cold, navigating frozen landscapes, hunting massive megafauna, and mastering fire, shelter, and clothing. Every aspect of life had been a negotiation with the environment, a balancing act between risk and resourcefulness, between isolation and cooperation. As the ice began to recede, glaciers withdrawing slowly across continents and climates warming, humans faced an entirely new set of challenges, opportunities, and uncertainties. The transition was neither rapid nor uniform. It was a gradual reconfiguration of landscapes, ecosystems, and human societies, demanding adaptation on every level: technological, social, cognitive, and cultural. The retreating ice revealed landscapes that had been inaccessible for millennia: valleys, rivers, plains, and coastal areas previously buried under kilometers of ice now became viable zones for habitation. These newly exposed lands were rich with resources, offering plant life, fresh water, and new animal populations. Yet they were also unfamiliar, requiring humans to explore, learn, and adapt quickly to new terrains and conditions. The same skills honed for survival in extreme cold, keen observation, strategic planning, cooperative hunting, and resource management, were repurposed to navigate these emerging environments. Humans had to interpret the changes, recognizing which areas were safe, which were rich in sustenance, and how seasonal shifts would now affect their survival strategies. Knowledge accumulated over generations became a critical tool, allowing humans to migrate efficiently, locate reliable resources, and avoid new dangers that arose in shifting ecosystems. Ecological dynamics underwent rapid transformation. Species that thrived in cold conditions diminished or disappeared, while those adapted to warmer climates expanded their ranges. Megafauna such as mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant ground sloths faced extinction pressures, altering hunting strategies that humans had relied upon for generations. Smaller, more adaptable species began to dominate, providing different opportunities and requiring new knowledge for capture and consumption. Humans had to diversify diets, develop more sophisticated trapping methods, and explore plant resources more systematically. The intimate relationship between humans and their environment became even more complex, as the very rules that had governed survival during the Ice Age were being rewritten by climate, migration, and ecological change. This period of transition also stimulated technological innovation. Tools became more specialized, reflecting the need to exploit a broader array of resources. Projectile points, fishing implements, grinding stones, and containers for storage all became increasingly refined. Humans learned to process grains, seeds, and tubers, developing early methods of food preservation that allowed communities to survive seasonal scarcity. Clothing and shelter evolved as well, adapting to milder winters and more variable weather. Innovations were not merely practical, they reflected a growing cognitive sophistication, the ability to anticipate environmental changes, plan ahead, and manipulate materials in increasingly complex ways. The deep freeze era had honed human ingenuity, and its lessons were applied to navigate a world no longer dominated by ice but defined by change and possibility. Social structures evolved alongside these technological shifts. Migration patterns became more organized, reflecting knowledge of resource locations, seasonal cycles, and intergroup territories. Communities began to expand, form semi-permanent settlements, and engage in more complex social interactions. Cooperation remained essential, but the scale and nature of that cooperation shifted. Trade, exchange of knowledge, and territorial negotiation became more prominent, reflecting both the opportunities and pressures of a warming world. Humans were learning not only to survive individually but to thrive collectively, leveraging social cohesion to navigate uncertainty and exploit emerging landscapes. Cultural and cognitive development accelerated. The challenges of adaptation spurred reflection, creativity, and symbolic thinking. Art, ritual, and storytelling flourished, capturing the lessons of survival, the experiences of migration, and the mysteries of a changing world. Early humans reflected on their place within the natural order, contemplating life, death, and continuity. The combination of environmental observation, social coordination, and reflective thought strengthened both community bonds and individual identity. Humans were no longer reacting solely to immediate survival needs, they were constructing meaning, embedding knowledge into cultural practices that could be transmitted across generations, and laying the foundations for philosophy, spirituality, and organized society. Population dynamics shifted in response to new opportunities. Fertile areas, abundant water, and milder climate supported growth, while the extinction of large prey forced adaptation in hunting and foraging practices. Humans became more mobile in some regions, following seasonal cycles, and more sedentary in others, developing localized knowledge and sustainable exploitation of resources. These demographic changes had profound implications for social organization, communication, and cultural transmission. Group sizes, leadership structures, and networks of cooperation evolved to reflect the demands of new ecologies, balancing mobility with stability and risk with opportunity. The interplay between humans and megafauna also shaped the trajectory of ecological transformation. As humans adapted to smaller, more abundant species, their influence on ecosystems persisted. Hunting pressure, selective gathering, and habitat modification created feedback loops that influenced animal populations, vegetation patterns, and ecological stability. Humans were not passive observers but active participants in shaping post-glacial landscapes. Their adaptive strategies reflected an understanding of cause and effect, demonstrating early ecological intelligence and the capacity to manipulate environments thoughtfully, balancing exploitation with sustainability. Psychologically, the end of the Ice Age brought both relief and uncertainty. The retreat of glaciers reduced immediate threats from extreme cold and resource scarcity, but the emergence of new environments, unfamiliar species, and fluctuating weather demanded continuous vigilance. Humans had to negotiate a landscape in flux, maintaining the resilience, curiosity, and ingenuity honed over millennia. Emotional and cognitive adaptability remained as crucial as physical survival skills, allowing humans to interpret signals, learn from experience, and anticipate challenges. The deep freeze era had forged not just bodies but minds capable of reflection, innovation, and foresight. In addition, the transition offered opportunities for symbolic and spiritual development. Humans may have interpreted changing landscapes and the disappearance of megafauna as signs of forces beyond human control, fostering ritual, myth, and moral reflection. Art, burial practices, and symbolic objects became increasingly sophisticated, reflecting awareness of mortality, community, and intergenerational continuity. These practices served practical purposes, reinforcing cohesion and knowledge transmission, while also addressing the existential dimensions of a changing world. Humans were learning to integrate survival, culture, and meaning, a hallmark of fully reflective consciousness. The culmination of Ice Age adaptation was the emergence of resilience as a defining human trait. Through millennia of cold, scarcity, and danger, humans had developed tools, clothing, fire mastery, shelter, cooperative strategies, and cultural practices that allowed them not only to endure but to anticipate, manipulate, and thrive. The end of the Ice Age tested these capacities, presenting new conditions that demanded the same ingenuity applied in novel ways. Humanity's ability to adapt to glacial and post-glacial worlds alike illustrates a continuity of skill, cognition, and social coordination that forms the foundation for all subsequent human history. Ultimately, the end of the Ice Age was more than a climatic event, it was a transformative epoch in human evolution. It demonstrated the interplay of environment, technology, society, and cognition, revealing a species capable of reflection, innovation, and foresight. Humans had become ecological engineers, cultural transmitters, and thoughtful navigators of uncertainty, using the lessons of millennia to shape both survival and meaning. The retreat of glaciers and the warming of the planet marked the opening of new horizons, both literal and metaphorical. Humanity emerged not merely as a survivor of ice but as a species capable of shaping its destiny, connecting intellect with environment, culture with survival, and past experience with future possibility. In the echoes of the deep freeze era, the skills, knowledge, and resilience of Ice Age humans would resonate across generations, informing every subsequent chapter of human history and establishing the blueprint for the complex, reflective, and adaptive species that we are today.